Welcome to another quiet hour together. Let your thoughts settle. Let the noise of the day fade behind you. Tonight we're traveling north, far north, to a place where winter arrives in October and doesn't leave until April, where darkness falls at 3 in the afternoon and doesn't lift until late morning, where the nearest town might be 50 miles away, accessible only by snow machine or bush plane when weather permits. We're visiting families who live in small cabins surrounded by spruce forest and snow. Families who have chosen a life without power lines, without grid connections, without the infrastructure most of us take for granted. These families face a simple, ancient challenge every single day of winter: stay warm or suffer the consequences. Their survival depends on fire, on wood cut months earlier, on knowledge passed down through generations, on routines practiced until they become instinct. Tonight, we'll explore how these families sleep through brutal winter nights when temperatures drop to 40 below zero and the darkness stretches for 17, 18, 19 hours. How they create warmth and comfort in one of the coldest inhabited regions on Earth. How children grow up learning that heat isn't a dial on the wall, but a responsibility shared by everyone old enough to carry firewood. We'll move slowly through their evening routines. We'll stand beside the wood stove that serves as the heart of the home. We'll understand the calculations they make every night: how much wood to bring inside, how to bank the fire for overnight, how to arrange sleeping spaces to conserve precious warmth. This isn't a story of suffering. It's a story of competence, of families who have built lives around winter's demands rather than against them. So settle in. Let us begin as afternoon light fades from the sky and another long Alaskan night approaches. The decision to live off-grid in Alaska is rarely accidental. Most families arrive through deliberate choice, not circumstance. They've weighed the isolation, the physical demands, the distance from medical care and stores. They've considered what their children will gain and what they'll miss. They've calculated the cost in labor against the cost in currency, and they've chosen the cabin in the woods. The reasons vary, but they share common threads. Self-sufficiency draws many families north, not the romantic notion of independence, but the practical reality of it. The knowledge that your family's warmth depends on wood you cut yourself, that dinner comes from game you harvested or food you preserved, that when something breaks, you fix it, because calling someone isn't an option. This self-sufficiency teaches children differently than conventional life does. A 7-year-old carrying firewood isn't doing chores. She's participating in survival. A 10-year-old learning to bank a fire for overnight isn't gaining a skill for later. He's contributing to the family's immediate well-being. These children grow up understanding cause and effect with unusual clarity. Fire requires wood. Wood requires cutting. Cutting requires planning. Warmth isn't automatic. Some families describe modern life as requiring too many intermediaries. You need money to pay the electric company to deliver power to heat your home. The chain is long and mostly invisible. Off-grid, the chain shortens dramatically. You need time, a chainsaw, and a forest. The directness appeals to people who trust their own labor more than complex systems. The economic reality matters too, though families rarely speak of it first. Alaska still has cheap land if you're willing to live far from roads. A family with modest savings might afford 40 acres of forested property. No mortgage or a small one paid quickly. Once established, monthly expenses shrink dramatically. No electric bill, no water bill. In some areas, no property taxes. The costs shift entirely. You pay in physical work and careful planning, rather than currency. This arrangement favors the young and strong over the cash-rich. A family with carpentry skills, mechanical aptitude, and willingness to work hard can build a life that would cost hundreds of thousands to purchase in the suburbs. They trade convenience for ownership, connectivity for equity. The land itself calls to some families. Alaska offers something increasingly rare: legal remoteness. Places where your nearest neighbor lives 10 miles away across roadless terrain, where you might not see another person for weeks during deep winter, where light pollution doesn't exist. and the only sounds are wind, wildlife, and your own wood smoke. This distance creates a different kind of safety. Not physical safety. Off-grid families face genuine dangers that suburban families never consider, but psychological safety. The freedom from constant social evaluation, from keeping up with expectations you never agreed to, from the ambient noise of other people's opinions arriving through screens and conversations. Children raised in this remoteness develop differently. They learn to tolerate, even enjoy, their own company. They don't expect constant stimulation. They understand boredom as a natural state that leads to creativity rather than a problem requiring immediate solution. They form intense bonds with family members because those relationships carry existential weight, not just emotional significance. The darkness and cold strip away the optional. Some families describe this clarity as addictive. When winter tightens its grip, what matters becomes obvious. Stay warm, preserve food, maintain shelter, care for each other. Everything else, all the complexity and anxiety that fills modern life, falls away as irrelevant. The long winter evenings restore time that elsewhere gets fragmented. Without internet, without television options, without the possibility of running errands, families sit together by lamplight. They talk, they read aloud, they play cards or board games that last hours. They teach and learn practical skills, hide tanning, tool sharpening, equipment repair. Older families sometimes speak of this as recovering something lost. Grandparents remember evenings like this from their own childhoods before rural electrification changed everything. They've chosen to give their grandchildren access to a pace of life that elsewhere exists only in historical memory. Younger families describe it differently, as opting out of a race that seemed designed to prevent actual living. They watched their peers work long hours to afford childcare so they could work long hours. They saw children being raised by institutions and screens. They wanted something else, even if that something else required brutal physical labor and genuine danger. The Alaskan homesteading tradition provides cultural support for this choice. Though the Federal Homestead Act ended in 1986, the ethic persists. Alaska still honors the idea that a family can claim land through labor and persistence, that proving up, building a dwelling, making improvements, living on the land creates legitimate ownership. This cultural memory makes off-grid families comprehensible to their neighbors rather than oddities. The families who succeed at this life share certain characteristics. They possess practical skills or the humility to learn them quickly. They can tolerate discomfort without panic. They find satisfaction in physical work. They communicate well enough to solve problems together when stress is high and options are limited. They've made peace with risk in a way that allows them to function despite legitimate danger. They also carry knowledge that can't be acquired from books, which wood species burn hottest and longest. How to read weather signs specific to their valley, where game animals move during different conditions. How to maintain mental health through months of darkness. When to push through difficulty and when to retreat to safety. This knowledge passes between families, neighbor to distant neighbor, generation to generation. It's shared over scratchy VHF radios during rare trips to town, through visits that might involve traveling hours by snow machine. The knowledge becomes a form of wealth more valuable than currency in this landscape. Some families have lived on their land for decades. They're raising grandchildren in cabins their own hands built. They've buried pets and sometimes people in ground. They cleared themselves. They've survived catastrophic cold snaps, equipment failures, medical emergencies, and the simple, accumulated weight of year after year of hard living. They stay because the life gives back something equivalent to what it demands. Not comfort, not ease, but a sense of coherence, of living in alignment with their values, of providing their children with something they believe matters more than conventional advantages. As winter darkness falls early this afternoon, as temperatures drop towards zero and keep falling, these families move into evening routines shaped by necessity and refined by practice. They're not struggling, they're competent. This is the life they chose, the life they've built, the life they'll maintain through another long winter night. and all the nights that follow until spring finally returns. Winter in interior Alaska is survived through work done months earlier. Every family living off-grid understands this equation. The warmth of February is created in July. Comfort during the coldest nights depends entirely on labor, performed during the brief, frantic summer. The work begins in late April or early May, as soon as the snow compacts enough to allow travel through the forest. Before breakup, the messy period when melting snow turns everything to mud, families identify dead standing trees. These are prizes, spruce or birch that died the previous year and have been drying on the stump ever since. Dead standing wood burns cleaner than green wood. It lights more easily. It produces more heat per log because energy isn't being wasted, evaporating moisture. A family that can harvest enough dead standing timber gains months of advantage. The wood is ready to burn after splitting, and a few weeks of air drying under cover. But dead standing trees are limited. Most families also cut green wood, accepting that it will require at least a summer of seasoning before it burns efficiently. The calculation is precise. A typical off-grid family needs 5 to 10 cords of firewood to survive an Alaskan winter. One cord equals a stack 4 feet high, 4 feet deep, and 8 feet long. Imagine that volume. Now multiply it by 7 or 8. That's the pile a family must create, log by log, between late spring and first snowfall. The process has distinct stages, each physically demanding. First comes the felling, walking through forest with a chainsaw, identifying suitable trees, making the cuts that drop them safely. A day's work might fell a week's worth of firewood if the wood is near the cabin, but often it's not. Often families must travel by four-wheeler or snow machine to where good timber stands, meaning transportation becomes the next problem to solve. After felling comes bucking, cutting the downed tree into rounds, usually 16 to 20 inches long. These rounds are heavy, often requiring 2 people to lift if the tree was substantial. The rounds get loaded onto trailers or sleds and hauled home. This hauling might happen over multiple trips across rough terrain. Back at the homestead, the rounds wait for splitting. Splitting firewood is the work that fills summer evenings and weekends. Some families use hydraulic splitters if they can afford one and have a way to power it. Most use mauls and wedges and the simple physics of the splitting axe. The work is rhythmic, meditative in its way, but also exhausting. Hour after hour of lifting, swinging, bending, stacking. Children participate according to ability. A 5-year-old carries split pieces to the woodshed. An 8-year-old stacks wood properly, bark up so rain runs off, air gaps between rows for circulation. A 12-year-old might split smaller rounds under supervision. A teenager works alongside adults as an equal partner in production. The families who've done this for years develop efficiency. They know how birch splits differently than spruce. They understand that rounds with knots require wedges and patience. They can look at a tree and estimate how many cords it will yield. But even with experience, the work is immense. A family cutting 8 cords is processing roughly 24,000 pounds of wood. They're lifting that weight multiple times, once to load it for transport, again to split it, again to stack it, and eventually again to carry it inside during winter. The summer preparation for winter warmth involves moving tons of material through multiple stages of processing. The wood gets stacked in sheds or under tarps, arranged so air flows through the pile. Good airflow is critical. It allows moisture to evaporate, turning green wood into seasoned wood that will burn hot and clean. Families stack wood in the spring and don't touch it until fall, giving it maximum drying time. By late August, the urgency increases. First frost can come in September. Serious snow arrives in October. Families look at their wood piles and calculate. Do they have enough? Have they misjudged? Winter is long. If you run out of firewood in March, you face weeks of desperate cold weather scrounging, cutting frozen wood in brutal conditions, burning green wood that produces minimal heat, rationing warmth in ways that make life genuinely dangerous. No experienced family wants to cut wood during winter. It's possible, but miserable. Chainsaws are harder to start in extreme cold. Fallen snow makes locating and accessing timber difficult. The wood you cut is often frozen, making it harder to split and slower to dry. And you're doing this work while already cold, already depleted from months of winter, while days are shortest and darkness is longest. So summer is the race. Get ahead. Build a surplus. Stack more wood than you think you'll need, because you might be wrong, or winter might be longer, or someone might get sick and wood gathering might fall behind. The woodpile becomes a calendar of sorts. In November, it's a fortress, a massive accumulation of fuel representing security. The family looks at it with satisfaction. They've done the work. They're prepared. By January, the pile is noticeably smaller. The family has been burning wood constantly for months. The neat stacks show gaps, but there's still plenty. The halfway point hasn't arrived yet. In March, the pile looks vulnerable. What seemed like abundance in fall now seems finite. The family calculates differently. How much longer until temperatures moderate? Can they stretch their supply if they're more conservative with fire? Should someone make a late winter cutting trip just in case? When April arrives and the pile is nearly exhausted, but spring is definitively here, there's quiet triumph. They made it. They calculated correctly. They did enough work the previous summer. And then it's May, and the cycle begins again. The physical demand of this work shapes family life in ways that suburban existence doesn't. Everyone is stronger than they would be otherwise. Everyone carries muscle memory of repetitive labor, the swing of the maul, the rhythm of stacking, the lift and carry of arm load after arm load. Bodies adapt, backs strengthen or give out. Hands develop thick calluses. Families learn their physical limits and either respect them or suffer consequences. Injuries from overwork or inadequate technique. Exhaustion that makes simple tasks dangerous. But beyond the physical demand, the work creates psychological preparation. By the time first snow falls, the family has been thinking about winter for months. They've been literally building their defense against it log by log. Winter doesn't arrive as a surprise or abstraction. It's a known challenge they've been preparing for with complete consciousness of what's coming. This changes how winter feels when it arrives. There's less anxiety because the primary work is done. The wood is stacked. The fuel is ready. Now it's just a matter of using it carefully, maintaining the fire, making the supply last. The hard part, the months of chainsaw work and splitting, is behind them. The woodpile also serves as visible proof of readiness. A family can walk outside, look at their stacked cords, and feel concrete assurance. This isn't hope or optimism. This is fuel. This is thermal energy stored in solid form, waiting to be released log by log through the cold months ahead. Children growing up in this cycle learn planning in a way that's uncommon elsewhere. They see directly that present comfort depends on past labor, that security comes from working ahead, that you can't procrastinate winter preparation without suffering tangible consequences. They learn that the easy time, summer when weather is pleasant, is when you work hardest, that you don't rest when conditions are favorable. You prepare for when conditions become brutal. This is ancient knowledge, the kind that agricultural societies understood instinctively. Plant in spring, harvest in fall, survive winter on what you've stored. Off-grid Alaskan families live a version of this cycle compressed into a more primal form. Gather fuel, store it, burn it carefully. Survive until you can gather again. As evening approaches on a winter night and the father makes his last trip to the woodshed before darkness fully settles, he's not just getting logs for tonight's fire. He's withdrawing from an account he deposited into months ago. Every piece of wood he carries inside is work made solid. Hours of his past self's labor now being converted into heat that will keep his children warm while they sleep. The wood doesn't care if he's tired tonight. It doesn't care about his mood or his preferences. It simply is, available because he made it available, abundant because he worked hard enough to make it abundant. This is how off-grid families survive winter, through summer's labor made tangible, stacked in rows, measured in cords, burned piece by piece through the long, cold darkness. The work of summer carries a different weight when you understand that winter will last 7 months. Not metaphorically, not approximately. 7 months when the land offers nothing, when hunting becomes difficult or impossible, when no garden grows and no berries ripen and the rivers themselves lock beneath ice too thick to break. So the work of gathering food begins in spring and doesn't end until snow makes it end. Families approach this with the methodical attention of people who have learned, sometimes through genuine hunger, that optimism is not a substitute for preparation. They count calories. They calculate protein. They measure their progress not in what they've preserved, but in how many weeks of eating it represents. The numbers are specific because they have to be. A family of 4 needs roughly 2,000 pounds of food to make it through winter with adequate nutrition and some margin for error. That's not a goal. That's a minimum, and it doesn't appear through wishful thinking or last-minute effort. It comes from salmon pulled from rivers in late summer, not by the handful, but by the hundreds. From moose or caribou harvested in fall, field-dressed immediately, butchered carefully, every portion used. From bulk purchases of rice, flour, oats, sugar, and cooking oil driven in by truck before roads become impassable. The methods of preservation are older than electricity. Root cellars dug below the frost line where temperature holds steady just above freezing. Dirt walls, wooden shelves, darkness. Families store potatoes, carrots, beets, cabbage, onions, vegetables that keep through cold months if conditions stay right. Too warm and they rot. Too cold and they freeze. The cellar exists in the narrow range between. Canning happens in bulk during harvest season. Families process salmon berries, vegetables, jam, working in assembly line fashion, filling hundreds of jars over weeks of focused labor. The jars line shelves in the cabin, a visible inventory of security. You can see how winter is going by watching the jars disappear. Meat gets smoked or dried into jerky, rendered into fat for cooking, or simply frozen. And here winter solves the problem it creates. The same brutal cold that threatens survival also preserves the food that enables it. Families use the outside world as a freezer, storing meat in elevated caches where it remains frozen solid from October through April, maintaining temperatures no appliance could match. The exterior world becomes storage. The deep cold becomes infrastructure. Some families shoot a moose in September and understand they've just secured protein for months. A bull moose provides 400 to 700 pounds of usable meat. Butchered and frozen, rationed carefully, it feeds a family through the darkest part of winter. But you can't wait until September to think about the moose. You need hunting skills developed over years. Knowledge of animal patterns and migration routes, the physical capability to pack meat miles through wilderness. Tools maintained and ready, permission, if you're on managed land, or intimate familiarity with where you're legally allowed to hunt. Salmon runs offer another form of abundance compressed into short windows. Families net or catch fish by the dozens, processing them immediately, filleting, smoking, canning. The work is hard and repetitive and smells powerfully of fish. It also means February will include protein. Some families maintain small greenhouses that extend growing seasons slightly, producing lettuce or herbs into October. Others sprout seeds indoors during winter, growing microgreens on windowsills for vitamins when fresh food becomes memory. But most of what sustains a family arrives in bulk shipments before winter locks the roads. 50-pound bags of rice and flour, cases of canned goods, dried beans by the sack, cooking oil by the gallon, coffee, tea, sugar, salt. Families calculate consumption rates and order accordingly, knowing that running out of staples in February means going without until April. The cost is significant, both in money and in planning. Bulk food purchases for a winter can exceed several $1,000s. Fuel for generators or heating adds more, propane for cooking and lights, kerosene for backup, ammunition for hunting. Families budget for this all year, setting aside money from summer work, understanding that one season's earnings must stretch across 12 months. Storage becomes its own challenge. Food needs to stay dry, away from rodents, organized enough that you can find what you need. Families use metal barrels, sealed plastic bins, elevated shelves. Some dig additional cold storage. Others build small cache sheds separate from the main cabin. And through it all runs the awareness that this isn't farming or gardening as hobby. This is the actual system keeping you fed. There's no grocery store an hour away if you miscalculate. No delivery service, no neighbors to borrow from, because your neighbors are managing the same scarcity. The jars on the shelf, the frozen moose in the cache, the sacks of rice in the barrel. That's what stands between your family and hunger. So you approach it seriously. You teach children to fish and process salmon, not as weekend activity but as fundamental skill. You involve them in canning, in butchering, in inventory. They learn young that food comes from labor, that meals trace back to specific days of hard work, that eating in winter is only possible because of what summer demanded. And you accept the narrowing of diet. Winter meals become repetitive. Oatmeal for breakfast, rice and beans with preserved vegetables, smoked salmon, moose stew. Fresh fruit disappears. Lettuce becomes a memory. Variety gives way to nutrition and calories. Families get creative with spices, with preparation methods, with combinations. But mostly they eat what they have. Grateful it's enough. By late fall, the work reaches completion. The cache is full. The root cellar is stocked. The shelves hold rows of jars. The barrels contain staples. Families take inventory one final time, counting weeks of food, identifying gaps, making last trips to town if possible. And then the snow comes, and the decision is made. You have what you have. The land outside offers nothing now. The rivers are frozen. The animals have migrated or gone to ground. The garden is buried. You'll live through winter on what you gathered during the months when gathering was possible. It's a way of eating that makes every meal a small act of gratitude, not abstractly, but concretely. You remember the day you caught these fish. You recall the work of processing this moose. You know which afternoon you spent canning these vegetables. Food stops being casual. It becomes the visible proof that you prepared well, that you understood what was coming, that you took winter seriously enough to survive it. The cabin is not a house. A house is where you live when infrastructure makes living easy. When furnaces respond to thermostats, when insulation is someone else's problem, when heat arrives through pipes or wires and cold stays outside, because building codes and contractors made sure of it. A cabin is what you inhabit when staying warm is something you engineer yourself. Every structural choice represents a negotiation with cold. Every design decision carries thermal consequences. The space becomes less like architecture and more like a survival system, an organism that breathes minimally, holds heat like a living thing holds body temperature, and requires constant attention to remain viable. Size matters first. Off-grid Alaskan cabins run small by modern standards, 400 to 800 square feet for a family, sometimes less. This isn't about aesthetics or minimalism, it's physics. Small spaces require less energy to heat. Every additional square foot represents more air to warm, more wall to insulate, more heat bleeding into the darkness outside. Families accept tight quarters because the alternative is burning more wood, which means cutting more wood, which means more labor for the same warmth. The cabin shrinks to the size that can be kept alive with available fuel. Ceilings stay low for the same reason. 8 feet is typical. Some go lower. Heat rises and tall ceilings mean you're heating empty air above your head while your feet stay cold. Low ceilings trap warmth where people actually live. You can feel the difference standing up versus sitting down. Your head enters noticeably warmer air. Layout follows heat logic rather than privacy or convention. The wood stove sits central, often in the main room where family spends most time. Everything radiates from that point of warmth. Sleeping areas locate close to the stove or in lofts directly above it, where rising heat gathers. Utility spaces that tolerate cold, storage, entryways pushed to the perimeter. The Arctic entry is critical. This is a small unheated mudroom between outside and inside, creating an airlock. When you come in from the cold, you enter the Arctic entry first. Close the outer door, then open the inner door to the heated cabin. This prevents the rush of frigid air that would flood the space if exterior doors open directly into living areas. Families store boots, coats, frozen goods, and anything else that doesn't need heat in this buffer zone. It's cold, but not as cold as outside, and it protects the warmth of the cabin itself. Windows are minimal because glass loses heat. Even double-pane windows insulate poorly compared to walls. Families install only enough windows for necessary light, keeping them small and positioning them strategically. South-facing windows capture solar heat during brief winter days. North-facing windows are avoided entirely. They lose heat without gaining anything in return. Some families cover windows with insulating panels at night or during extreme cold, blocking the thermal drain entirely. Walls carry the real work of insulation. Traditional log cabins use the thermal mass of wood itself, thick logs that absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night. Gaps between logs get chinked with moss, oakum, or modern foam to eliminate drafts. Many cabins add interior insulation, fiberglass bats, rigid foam panels, or even additional layers of wood, creating dead air space. Some families insulate to R30 or higher in walls, R40 in ceilings, understanding that every improvement in insulation means less wood burned and more warmth retained. Floors matter too. Cabins built on posts or piers allow cold air to circulate underneath, freezing floors from below. Families insulate floor joists, lay thick rugs, or build directly on gravel or foam foundations that break contact with frozen ground. Cold feet make the whole body feel cold, so keeping floors above freezing becomes priority. The cabin develops a thermal geography that everyone learns without being taught. Near the stove, it might be 75 degrees Fahrenheit. 10 feet away, 65 degrees Fahrenheit. In the corners farthest from the stove, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Overnight, when fire dies to coals, those numbers drop. Stove area to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Distant corners to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The cabin doesn't maintain even temperature. It maintains survivable temperature, with zones of greater and lesser warmth. Families unconsciously navigate these zones. You sit near the stove to read. You move to a cooler area if you're washing dishes and working up heat from activity. Children play in the warmest spots. Sleeping happens in lofts where heat collects. The space becomes less like rooms and more like a landscape of temperature, microclimates within a single structure, each serving different purposes. Sleeping lofts capture this principle deliberately. Heat rises. A loft 8 feet above the main floor sits in significantly warmer air. Families build sleeping platforms accessible by ladder, creating bedrooms in what would otherwise be wasted thermal space. Children sleep warm overhead while adults tend the fire below. Some cabins include small sleeping nooks with curtains that can be closed, trapping body heat and creating even warmer microenvironments for sleep. Ventilation becomes a careful balance. Burning wood consumes oxygen and produces carbon monoxide. Families need fresh air. But fresh air is cold air. Too much ventilation and you lose heat. Too little and you risk carbon monoxide poisoning. Most cabins include adjustable vents near the stove to feed combustion air, plus small vents elsewhere that can be opened or closed to manage air exchange. Families learn to read signs of poor ventilation, headaches, sluggishness, and adjust accordingly. The cabin breathes, but only as much as it must. Every component serves thermal purpose. Thick curtains over windows at night, rugs on floors, shelves and storage along exterior walls creating additional insulation. Even furniture placement matters. Bookcases against cold walls, seating near the stove. Families view their space as a heat retention system, where everything either helps or hurts. Over years, they optimize. They discover cold spots and address them. They find drafts and seal them. They learn where moisture condenses and plan accordingly. The cabin stops being static. It becomes something you maintain, adjust, and respond to. You feel its moods. You know when it's holding heat well and when it's losing the battle. You read temperature drops and understand what they mean about outside conditions or fire status. In deep cold, the cabin creaks and pops as wood contracts. Nails loosen slightly. Gaps appear that weren't there in summer. Families accept this movement, understanding that the structure is responding to forces, shifting but not failing. And through it all, the stove remains the heart. The cabin is designed around it. Heat radiates from that central point, and everything else positions itself in relation to that warmth. Remove the stove and the cabin becomes uninhabitable. Keep the stove burning and the structure does what it was built to do. It holds life inside while winter presses against every surface outside. Not perfectly, not comfortably by modern standards, but enough. Enough that sleep is possible, that children stay warm, that mornings arrive cold but not dangerous, that families endure months of darkness and sub-zero nights inside a space specifically engineered for that endurance. The cabin as organism, the cabin as survival system, the cabin as the thin shell of warmth between you and a landscape that would kill you in hours. The walls of an off-grid Alaskan cabin do more than define rooms. They hold heat against pressure. They negotiate with cold. Every structural choice represents a decision about survival, about how warmth will be captured, contained, and conserved through months when the temperature outside wants to equalize with the temperature inside. When families build or renovate for winter living, they think in terms of thermal performance before aesthetics. The cabin becomes an instrument designed to maintain life in conditions that would otherwise extinguish it. Log walls offer natural advantages. Wood itself insulates. Better than metal, better than concrete. The mass of whole logs absorbs heat during the day, releases it slowly at night. A cabin built from substantial timber moderates temperature swings, staying warmer when the fire burns low, cooling more slowly when wind howls outside. The logs breathe slightly, allowing moisture to escape without creating drafts. Families speak of their cabins as living structures, wood expanding and contracting with temperature, settling over years into tighter seals. But logs alone don't suffice in extreme cold. Many families add layers. Rigid foam insulation goes between log walls and interior paneling. Fiberglass fills gaps. Some use traditional chinking, moss, oakum, modern synthetic compounds to seal spaces where logs meet imperfectly. Each added layer represents recognition that winter will find every weakness, exploit every gap. The cabin must be fortified like a body preparing for siege. The ceiling matters as much as walls. Heat rises. Without proper ceiling insulation, warmth simply flows upward and away, lost to the roof and the frozen air beyond. Families pack attic spaces with thick insulation, sometimes 2 feet of fiberglass, blown cellulose, or rigid foam. The goal is trapping heat below, creating a warm layer of air that can't escape. Many families accept that attic spaces will freeze, focusing instead on creating a warm zone in living areas, surrendering the periphery to cold. Windows present the greatest challenge. Glass conducts heat rapidly outward. Even double-paned windows lose warmth faster than insulated walls. Off-grid families minimize window size and number, placing them strategically for critical daylight rather than views. South-facing windows capture winter sun. North-facing walls often have none. Some families add interior shutters, insulated panels that close over windows at night, creating an additional barrier. Others hang heavy curtains, blankets, or emergency reflective material during the coldest nights, sacrificing light for warmth. The entry requires careful design. Every time a door opens directly into living space, warm air rushes out and cold air floods in. The Arctic entry solves this, a small, unheated mudroom that creates an airlock. You enter from outside. Close the outer door, then open the inner door into the warm cabin. Cold air trapped in the entry stays there. Warm air stays inside. This small addition dramatically reduces heat loss. The Arctic entry also serves as storage for frozen goods, a place where winter clothing can be removed before entering warm space, and a buffer that prevents bitter wind from blasting directly into the home. Families learn to think in terms of warm zones and cold zones. Not every space needs to be heated equally. Bedrooms might be allowed to cool if sleeping happens in lofts near the ceiling where heat concentrates. Storage areas can freeze. They become extensions of the outdoor cold, places where food stays naturally preserved. The main living area around the wood stove becomes the heart, the only space maintained at true comfort. Families accept this geography, planning their lives around it rather than fighting it. Floor insulation matters more than many expect. Cold rises from the ground, especially in permafrost regions where frozen earth conducts cold upward relentlessly. Cabins built on raised foundations with insulated floors fare better than those built directly on ground. Airspace beneath the cabin, combined with thick floor insulation, creates separation from the frozen earth. Some families add rugs, foam mats, or extra flooring layers in winter, creating additional barriers between feet and cold. Sleeping lofts exploit natural physics. Heat rises and collects near the ceiling. Many cabins include lofts accessed by ladder, creating sleeping spaces in the warmest zone. Children or entire families might sleep in lofts during the coldest months, abandoning ground floor bedrooms that can't stay warm. The loft becomes a warm cave within the larger structure, a place where body heat and rising warmth from the stove below combine. Some families describe waking in the loft comfortably warm, while the main floor sits cold until the morning fire rebuilds. The wood stove's placement determines everything else. Centrally located stoves radiate heat in all directions, warming the cabin more evenly. Stoves placed against exterior walls lose heat through that wall. Families plan furniture, sleeping areas, and daily activity spaces in relation to the stove's position. Distance from the stove becomes a primary organizing principle. The closer, the warmer. The stove often sits in the exact center of the main living area, with the stovepipe rising straight through the roof, radiating heat through its entire length before exiting. Compact layouts outperform sprawling ones. A small cabin heats more efficiently than a large one. Families living off-grid often choose spaces that feel tight by modern standards. 400 to 800 square feet for entire families. Less volume means less air to heat, shorter distances for warmth to travel, fewer corners where cold can settle. The compression creates challenges for privacy and personal space, but it serves survival. Families learn to inhabit small spaces gracefully, developing rhythms that allow multiple people to coexist without conflict. Low ceilings trap warmth. 8-foot ceilings keep heat closer to living level than 10 or 12-foot ceilings. Heat doesn't have to rise as far before it's contained. Some cabins feature even lower ceilings in sleeping areas or side rooms, creating spaces that warm quickly and stay warm with minimal input. Taller family members adjust, ducking slightly, accepting the trade-off. Comfort comes from warmth, not spaciousness. The roof angle affects snow load and heat retention. Steep roofs shed snow, preventing dangerous accumulation, but they also create more attic volume, more space that must be insulated to prevent heat loss. Families balance these concerns, steep enough to avoid structural danger from snow weight, but not so steep that heat loss becomes unmanageable. Metal roofing sheds snow efficiently and lasts decades. The roof becomes the cabin's final barrier against the elements, holding weather out and warmth in. The entire structure works as a system. No single element ensures survival. The walls, ceiling, floor, windows, entry, and stove function together. Families learn their cabin's particular character, where drafts appear, which corners stay coldest, how the stove's heat moves through the space. They adjust, compensate, and adapt. They stuff extra insulation where cold persists. They rearrange furniture to improve heat flow. They develop an intimacy with their structure born from absolute dependence. The cabin becomes known the way you know your own body. You feel when something is wrong. You sense when cold is winning. And you respond before crisis arrives, maintaining the balance that keeps winter outside and warmth within. Water becomes a different substance in deep cold. What flows effortlessly from taps in modern homes transforms into something heavy, precious, and stubbornly solid. Ice forms in pipes and containers in the ground itself. Off-grid Alaskan families don't simply turn a handle for water. They engineer it, haul it, protect it, and melt it. Water stops being invisible and becomes work. Wells that function in summer freeze solid in winter. Even wells drilled below frost line, 6, 8, 10 feet down, can freeze at the wellhead where pipes rise toward the surface. Pumps stop functioning. Standing water in pipes turns to ice, expanding and cracking the very systems meant to deliver it. Most off-grid families accept that wells become unusable for months. They plan accordingly, developing alternative systems before cold makes improvisation impossible. Some families haul water from unfrozen sources. Springs that flow from deep underground sometimes stay liquid through winter, their water warmed slightly by geothermal heat. Families locate these springs and make regular trips, often several times weekly, carrying 5-gallon buckets or jerry cans. A family of 4 might use 10 to 15 gallons daily for drinking, cooking, and basic washing. That's 2 to 3 heavy trips. Each journey requires dressing for extreme cold, sometimes traveling by snow machine or on foot, breaking ice from the collection point, filling containers, transporting them home without spilling or freezing. The works becomes routine, but it never becomes easy. Water is heavy, 8 pounds per gallon. 15 gallons weighs more than 100 pounds. Carrying that weight in deep snow and bitter wind, while wearing bulky winter clothing tests endurance. Families develop techniques, sleds for hauling multiple containers, shoulder yokes for balancing weight, frequent rest stops, children old enough to help learn young. The family's water supply depends on collective effort. Some families melt snow for water. Fresh snow can provide drinking water if melted properly, but snow is mostly air. It takes a large volume of snow to produce a small amount of water, roughly 10 to 1 by volume. Melting snow also requires substantial fuel. Families place large pots of snow on the wood stove, waiting as it slowly collapses into water. The process takes hours. Melting enough snow for daily needs means keeping pots constantly cycling, adding snow, pouring off water, adding more snow. It's fuel-intensive and time-consuming, usually reserved for emergencies or supplementing hauled water rather than serving as the primary source. Preventing water from freezing becomes constant work. Once water reaches the cabin, it must be protected. Containers kept too far from the stove freeze overnight. Families keep drinking water close to heat, near the stove, wrapped in insulation, sometimes even warming slightly before use. Larger containers for washing might be allowed to freeze partially, with families breaking ice and melting chunks as needed. Water for morning becomes part of evening preparation, filling kettles, placing them within the warm zone, ensuring tomorrow's needs are protected tonight. Some families maintain gravity-fed systems with extreme effort. A spring or stream uphill from the cabin can provide running water via gravity if the pipe stays unfrozen. Families achieve this by burying pipes deep below frost line, sometimes 4 to 6 feet down in permafrost regions. Insulation wraps the pipe. Some systems include heat tape powered by solar or generator. The pipe enters the cabin through the floor, ideally rising into the warmest area. Even with precautions, cold spells can threaten the system. Families sometimes run water continuously in thin streams, preventing standing water from freezing. They waste water to save the system. Bathing becomes a major production. Heating enough water for a bath requires planning and fuel. Many families heat water in large pots on the wood stove, a process taking hours. A full bath might require 20 to 30 gallons, more than a day's hauled water supply. Families bathe in wash tubs, camping showers, or small, soaking tubs using water efficiently. Some bathe weekly, others manage sponge baths more frequently, heating smaller amounts for washing face, hands, and body sections at a time. The work required makes cleanliness a conscious achievement rather than an assumption. Laundry demands even more water and heat. Washing clothes without electric machines means heating water, scrubbing by hand, or using manual washers, rinsing and wringing. A single load might require 10 to 15 gallons. Drying happens indoors near the stove, humidity adding to the cabin's atmosphere. Families wash less frequently, wear clothes longer, prioritize items that truly need cleaning. Laundry day becomes a significant event requiring dedicated time and effort. Dishes add to the daily water burden. Washing dishes in hauled, heated water makes families conscious of every pot and plate. Some families reduce dish use by eating from shared pots, using bread to wipe plates clean, minimizing cooking vessels. Dishwater gets reused. Water from washing might then be used for initial rinsing, then for cleaning floors or other tasks before being discarded. Nothing is wasted. The cascade of uses extends water's value before it's finally thrown outside to freeze instantly. Families develop hierarchies of water use. Cleanest water for drinking and cooking. Next cleanest for washing bodies. Used bath water for laundry or dishes. Final rinse water for floors or outdoor use. Water moves through stages of decreasing purity, serving multiple purposes before disposal. This mirrors historical practices from before indoor plumbing. Knowledge recovered by necessity. Nighttime water needs require advanced planning. Families keep drinking water by bedsides, knowing thirst will come in the dry air of a heated cabin. These containers must stay warm enough to remain liquid. A frozen water bottle at 2 a.m. means getting up, dressing warmly, crossing cold floor space, and breaking ice or melting water by the stove. Easier to prepare properly before sleep. Filled containers placed in sleeping areas, wrapped if necessary, positioned to benefit from rising heat. Winter transforms water into labor. Every shower in a modern home, every careless tap left running, every toilet flush represents water that arrives effortlessly. Off-grid families live with the opposite reality. Water arrives through cold, through work, through planning. It must be protected, conserved, and used with intention. The invisible becomes visible. The effortless becomes earned. And yet families adapt. They develop efficiency. They learn their systems. They teach children that water isn't magic from pipes, but a resource gathered, heated, and protected. The work shapes daily rhythm. Hauling days, heating times, washing schedules, all planned around water's demands. In this way, modern convenience's most basic element becomes one of winter's central challenges, and one of the skills that defines competent off-grid living. The preparation for winter in Alaska extends beyond firewood and food. There's another kind of stockpiling that happens before the darkness arrives, the mental kind. Families who live off-grid in the far north understand that the physical challenges of winter, the cold, the labor, the isolation, are only part of what they will face. The other part is psychological. The darkness itself becomes a presence, not just night, but the near absence of day. In the deepest part of winter, the sun may rise weakly at 11 in the morning and set by 2 in the afternoon, or it may not rise at all. This is not ordinary darkness. It is sustained, pervasive, and disorienting. The body expects rhythm. Light, then dark. Day, then night. In the Alaskan winter, that rhythm breaks. The darkness stretches across weeks, and the mind must find a way to live within it. Experienced families prepare for this the way they prepare their wood piles. They talk about it before it arrives. They acknowledge what is coming. Parents and children sit together in late fall and discuss expectations. They make plans. They establish small agreements that will hold them through the months ahead. One family might commit to going outside every single day, no matter the weather, no matter the temperature. Even if it is just 10 minutes, even if it is only to stand in the yard and breathe cold air under starlight. The commitment is not about enjoying the outdoors. It is about breaking the seal of the cabin, preventing the psychological enclosure from becoming absolute. Another family might plan specific projects, building something, learning something, teaching the children a skill that requires weeks of sustained attention. The project becomes a structure within the structureless dark. It creates progression when the days themselves offer none. Books are stockpiled like food. Families order boxes of them in the fall or load up on library visits before winter settles. Reading becomes a way to leave the cabin without opening the door. Stories and information create mental travel when physical travel is impossible. Activities are planned and materials gathered. Art supplies, puzzles, board games, musical instruments, knitting wool, wood carving tools, anything that occupies hands and mind. Boredom in a small space with the same few people for months is not a minor inconvenience. It is a destabilizing force. Families who thrive in winter are families who take boredom seriously and plan against it. Routines are discussed and agreed upon: wake time, meal time, work time, rest time. The routine is not about rigid control. It is about creating a framework when natural light no longer provides one. The body and mind need markers. Without sunrise to signal morning and sunset to signal evening, the day can collapse into a formless stretch. Routine rebuilds the day. Some families establish rules around personal space and alone time. In a one-room or two-room cabin, privacy is nearly impossible. Everyone is always within sight and sound of everyone else. Successful families recognize this and create agreements. Maybe one person gets the loft for an hour each evening. Maybe a parent takes a walk alone while the other stays with the children. Maybe there is a corner that becomes someone's space, and the family respects it. The darkness affects more than schedule. It affects mood, energy, sleep. The body's internal systems expect light to regulate them. Without it, sleep cycles drift. Some people sleep too much, others cannot sleep well at all. Some families use full-spectrum light bulbs powered by small solar setups or generators, trying to give their bodies something closer to daylight. Others accept the disruption and adjust as best they can. Children experience the darkness differently than adults. For some, it becomes cozy, lamplight and family closeness, the cabin as a warm nest against the outer cold and dark. For others, it is harder. The lack of outdoor play, the sameness of the days, the absence of friends. Parents watch their children carefully during the dark months, attentive to shifts in mood or energy that signal struggle. There is also the whiteness. When daylight does appear, it reveals a landscape drained of color. Snow covers everything. The sky is often pale gray. The spruce trees are dark shapes against white and gray. The world becomes monochrome. This visual deprivation, combined with the silence, the cold, and the isolation, creates a sensory emptiness that some people find peaceful and others find suffocating. Families talk about this ahead of time. They name it. They prepare for the weight of it. And they make quiet promises to one another. We will get through this. We will take care of each other. We will not let the darkness win. Because winter in Alaska is not just survived through firewood and food. It is survived through the small agreements made before it arrives. Through routines that hold the day together. Through projects that create meaning. Through the commitment to step outside, to read, to play, to give each other space and closeness in the right measures. The families who manage the darkness best are the ones who respect it, who do not pretend it is easy, who build their mental reserves the same way they build their wood piles, carefully, deliberately, knowing they will need every bit of what they have stored. When the darkness finally arrives, it arrives completely, and the family is as ready as they can be. The wood stove is not furniture. It is not simply a tool. In an off-grid Alaskan cabin, the stove is the center of everything. It is furnace, kitchen, oven, water heater, clothes dryer, and gathering place. It is the only source of warmth in a landscape that offers none. And over the course of a winter, the family comes to know it the way they know each other. Each stove has a temperament. Some burn hot and fast, demanding frequent feeding. Others hold a slow, steady heat that lasts through the night. Families learn their stove's moods. They learn what it sounds like when the draft is good. The deep, quiet roar of air pulling cleanly through the firebox. They learn the rattling hiss of a backdraft. The dangerous moment when smoke reverses and spills into the room instead of up the chimney. They learn which wood it prefers. Birch burns hot and fast, perfect for morning when the cabin is cold and the family needs heat immediately. Spruce burns steadier, reliable for the long middle hours of the day. Cottonwood, if dried properly, creates thick beds of coals that can hold fire overnight, allowing the family to wake to embers instead of cold ash. Feeding the stove becomes an ongoing conversation. Too much wood at once smothers the fire. Too little lets it die. The right amount, placed at the right time, keeps the heat constant. Families develop an intuition for this. A glance at the stove tells them whether it needs another log now or can wait another 20 minutes. They know by the color of the flame, the sound of the burn, the warmth radiating into the room. Some families speak of their stove as though it has personality. "She's hungry tonight," a parent might say, adding another split of birch. Or, "He's in a good mood today," when the fire draws cleanly and the heat spreads evenly. This is not whimsy. It is the recognition of a relationship. The stove gives warmth and makes life possible. The family gives it constant attention and fuel. The exchange is mutual, and it never stops. The stove defines the geography of the cabin. Near it, the air is warm, sometimes too warm. Sitting close to the stove in the evening means sleeves rolled up, faces flushed, but moved 10 feet away, and the temperature drops noticeably. In the far corners of the cabin, away from the stove's direct heat, the cold lingers. The floor stays colder than the air. Drafts creep along the baseboards. Families navigate this thermal landscape without thinking about it. Children do homework near the stove where the light is good and the warmth makes it easy to focus. Parents prepare food directly on the stovetop, boiling water in cast iron pots. Baking bread in the oven compartment built into the firebox. Wet boots and gloves dry on racks near the stove. Steam rising from damp wool. Sleeping arrangements follow the heat. Lofts, accessed by ladder, become the warmest sleeping spaces because heat rises. Families place beds near the stove when possible, or they accept that blankets must be heavy and plentiful in the farther rooms. Some families sleep in shifts during the coldest nights, one person staying awake to feed the fire every few hours so the others can sleep without waking to freezing air. The stove is also the social center. In the evening, the family gathers near it, not because they decide to, but because the warmth draws them. Chairs and benches cluster in the warm zone. Conversation happens there. Reading happens there. The quiet companionship of being together in a small, warm space while the world outside is dark and frozen. Cooking on the wood stove requires different skills than cooking on a modern range. There are no dials, no precise temperature settings. Heat is controlled by managing the fire and positioning the pots. A pot placed directly over the firebox gets intense heat. Moved to the side, it simmers. Families learn to cook one-pot meals, stews, soups, beans, rice, that can sit on the stove for hours, thickening and warming, ready whenever someone is hungry. Baking works the same way. Bread dough rises near the stove's warmth, then bakes in the oven box. The temperature is judged by experience, by the sound of the fire, by opening the door and feeling the heat with a hand held inside. There is no timer, there is attention. The stove is never truly off. Even when the fire burns low, coals remain. In the morning, those coals are the starting point. Thin kindling is added. The embers glow brighter as oxygen reaches them. Small flames appear. Slightly larger wood is added. The fire grows. The cabin begins to warm. Every morning starts this way, rebuilding the fire, rebuilding the warmth, bringing the cabin back to life. Children grow up learning the stove. They learn fire safety early because they must. They learn how to open the door without letting smoke spill out. They learn how to add wood without disturbing the coals. They learn to recognize the sound of a healthy fire. By the time they are old enough to be left alone for a few minutes, they know how to keep the stove fed. There is a particular intimacy in this. The stove is a constant need and a constant gift. It asks for attention and gives warmth. It requires care and provides life. The relationship is not optional. In winter in the far north, the stove is survival. And so the family tends it, watches it, speaks of it with familiarity and respect. It is the heart of the home. And like a heart, it cannot be allowed to stop. The cabin does not heat evenly, not even close. The space divides itself into territories of warmth and zones of persistent cold, invisible borders marked only by what you feel as you move through the room. Families learn this landscape by living in it. They come to know it without thinking, the way you know the layout of your own home in darkness. Near the wood stove, the air reaches 70 or 75 degrees. Comfortable. Almost too warm if you sit there long. But step back 6 feet and the temperature drops noticeably. Another few feet and you're in the low 60s. The far corners of the cabin, places the stove's heat never quite reaches, might hover around 50 degrees. Cold enough to see your breath if you stand still too long. This isn't a failure of the stove. It's physics. Heat radiates outward from the source, warming what's closest first. In a compact cabin with a single heat source, temperature gradients are steep and permanent. You can feel them as you walk. Moving from the stove toward the door is like walking backward through seasons. Summer at the firebox, autumn at the table, early winter in the bedroom, deep cold near the entryway. Families don't fight this. They adapt to it. Sleeping lofts, when cabins have them, capture the warmest air. Heat rises always, and the space up near the ceiling becomes the most comfortable area for rest. Children climb ladders to beds positioned where warmth gathers naturally. Parents sometimes follow, abandoning ground floor bedrooms in the coldest months to sleep where the air stays above 60 through the night. The coldest spaces get used strategically. Food storage happens in corners far from the stove. Butter stays firm. Root vegetables don't sprout. Meat brought in from outside storage lasts longer. Coats hang in the Arctic entry where cold air settles. Water buckets sit in transitional zones, cold enough to stay fresh but not so cold they freeze. Evening activities arrange themselves around this thermal map. Reading happens close to the stove, where light and warmth coincide. Board games spread across the table, positioned in the middle zone. Warm enough to be comfortable, not so hot that sitting there becomes stifling. Active tasks, chopping vegetables, folding laundry, organizing supplies, happen in cooler areas where movement generates its own heat. Children learn the geography without being taught. They gravitate toward warmth when they're still. Playing quietly near the stove with books or small toys. When energy demands release, they migrate to cooler zones, where running and wrestling don't overheat them. Toddlers nap in the warmest spots, bundled close to the heat source where parents can watch them. Adults develop unconscious patterns. A mother preparing dinner moves between stove-side cooking and the cooler area where ingredients wait. A father reading in the evening shifts his chair incrementally closer to the fire as the night deepens, and the stove's heat begins to fade between feedings. People dress in layers and shed or add them as they move through the room's microclimates. The thermal landscape changes through the night. When the fire burns hot after fresh wood, warmth spreads farther, pushing the cold back toward the walls. As hours pass and the fire settles to coals, cold advances from the corners, reclaiming territory. By morning, the warm zone has shrunk to a small radius around the dying fire, and the cabin's edges have grown genuinely frigid. Drafts complicate the map. A gap around a window frame sends a stream of cold air across one section of floor. The Arctic entry, even well-designed, leaks cold when wind blows from certain directions. Families learn where these cold rivers flow and avoid them, positioning furniture to block drafts, or simply knowing not to sit in those spots. The bathroom, if there is an indoor one, occupies the coldest real estate. Plumbing requires proximity to exterior walls, and heating a space used intermittently wastes precious warmth. Trips to wash or use the toilet become quick expeditions into cold territory. You don't linger. You move fast, do what's needed, return to warmth. Some families hang blankets or curtains to partition spaces, creating smaller volumes that hold heat better. A curtain across the sleeping area traps warmth that would otherwise rise to the peak of the ceiling and dissipate. Closing off unused rooms in the coldest months concentrates heat where people actually spend time. Visitors unfamiliar with off-grid life are often startled by the temperature variation. They expect central heating's uniform warmth. Instead, they find a landscape of hot and cold, a cabin that feels like several different climates stitched together. But for the families living there, this becomes normal, comfortable even. The warmth near the stove feels earned. The cold reminds you what the fire is keeping at bay. Children sometimes make a game of it, testing how far from the stove they can stand, seeing who can tolerate the cold corners longest before retreating to heat. Adults joke about the cabin's weather, commenting that it's nice over by the stove today, cold front moving in near the bookshelf. The geography shifts slightly with outside conditions. On the coldest nights, when temperatures outside plunge to 40 below, cold presses harder against the walls and the warm zone shrinks. On relatively mild days, 0 degrees instead of 30 below, heat spreads more easily, and the cabin's range of temperatures narrows. Families navigate this landscape hundreds of times each day without conscious thought. The route from bed to stove for morning fire starting, the path from a wood pile to firebox, the circuit between warm zones during evening routines. Each movement maps itself onto the cabin's thermal reality. Bodies learning to seek warmth or cooling as needed, working with the space's natural patterns instead of against them. This is not hardship, exactly. It's simply how warmth works when you make it yourself, when a single fire serves a whole family, when winter rules the world outside. You learn the warm places. You know where cold lingers, and you live accordingly, moving through your home like a ship's crew, learning every deck and hold, every place where heat gathers or cold intrudes, reading the air itself for information about where to stand, where to sit, where to rest through the long hours of winter darkness. As light fades, someone goes for wood. This happens every evening in every off-grid cabin through every Alaskan winter, not once, but repeatedly. A rhythm that structures the hours between dinner and sleep. The woodshed stands separate from the cabin, sometimes just a few steps away, sometimes 20 or 30 yards through snow. Separation is deliberate. If the woodpile were built against the cabin wall, it would trap moisture, invite insects, create rot. So the wood lives outside, under a roof to keep snow off but open to the air, stacked in rows that represent months of future warmth. The trip out begins with preparation. Boots already dried by the stove get pulled on. A headlamp clicks to life if darkness has fully arrived. The outer door opens. The Arctic entry absorbs the first shock of cold, and then the exterior door, and you step into winter. Outside, the temperature might be 10 below, or 20, or 40. The cold hits your face immediately, the only exposed skin. Your breath plumes white in the beam of the headlamp. Snow squeaks underfoot, a sound that only happens in deep cold when ice crystals are hard and dry. At the woodshed, you load up. How much depends on how long until the next trip. 4 or 5 split logs carried in a cradled arm load. Kindling tucked on top if the inside supply is low. The wood is cold to touch, even through gloves, sometimes crusted with frost. The return trip reverses the route, back through the door. Into the Arctic entry where wood gets stacked temporarily or carried straight through to the cabin. Inside, the warmth feels aggressive after even 2 minutes in the cold. Your face tingles as it warms. Frost on your jacket begins to melt. The wood goes into the rack beside the stove or directly into the firebox if the fire needs feeding now. Then the process repeats. Not immediately, but soon. An hour later, 2 hours, again before bed. The evening punctuated by these trips, this rhythm of going out and coming back. Children often take turns carrying wood. It's a task they can handle, useful contribution to family survival. A 6-year-old can manage 2 or 3 small logs. A 12-year-old carries as much as an adult. They learn to stack it properly in their arms, to navigate the snowy path without dropping pieces, to close doors quickly behind them so heat doesn't escape. Some families make it a shared task. 2 people go together, doubling the load. Conversation happens on these trips or comfortable silence. Brief exchanges while standing in the woodshed deciding which logs to take. The work creates space for connection. Not forced, just available. The fire itself demands attention through the evening. You open the door to check it. The interior glows orange and red, coals pulsing with heat. You read the fire by looking. Does it need more wood now, or can it wait? Are the coals still substantial or burning down to ash? Is there enough flame, or has it settled too much? Feeding the fire is not complicated, but it requires judgment. Too much wood and you waste it or overheat the cabin. Too little and the fire dies back to coals too soon, and you'll be cold within an hour. You learn your stove's appetite by living with it, how it behaves when loaded full, how long it burns on 3 logs versus 5, how different woods act. Birch catching fast and burning hot, spruce faster still, but less heat. The slow coal-like burn of dense hardwoods. Adjusting the damper controls airflow. More air and the fire burns hotter but faster. Less air and it burns slower, more efficiently. And stretching the same wood across more hours. Through the evening, someone walks past the stove periodically, checks the fire, tweaks the damper, adds a log if needed. This happens without discussion. Whoever is closest, whoever notices. The sounds of fire tendon become part of evening soundtrack. The iron clunk of the stove door opening and closing, the scrape of the poker shifting logs, the soft crash of a new piece of wood landing on coals. The adjustment of the damper, metal on metal. These sounds mean warmth continuing, safety maintained, the family's central system being cared for. Ash accumulates and must be managed, not every night, but regularly. You wait until the fire burns low, then use a small shovel to scoop ash from the firebox into a metal bucket. The ash is still hot. It will stay hot for hours, even days, so the bucket sits in the Arctic entry or outside, where it can't ignite anything. Later, when fully cold, the ash goes into the garden for spring or scatters into the woods. Splitting kindling happens indoors on cold nights. A small hatchet, a piece of softwood, a cutting board positioned away from the stove. You split thin pieces to use for starting tomorrow's fire or reviving tonight's if it fades. The motion is repetitive, almost meditative. Children watch and learn. Eventually, they try it themselves under supervision, learning to control the hatchet, to read the grain of the wood, to split thin without splitting their fingers. The wood itself becomes familiar. You know birch by its white bark and relative light weight, spruce by its knots and resinous smell. Each species burns differently, and you choose what to feed the fire based on what you need. Quick heat, long burn, overnight coals. Bringing in wood is not romantic. It's work. In deep cold, it's uncomfortable work. But it's also simple, rhythmic, manageable. It requires no special skill, just consistency, and it provides something valuable beyond the wood itself. It creates breaks in the evening, natural pauses, moments of movement between stretches of stillness. The ritual marks time. You know it's mid-evening when you make the 3rd trip for wood. You know bedtime approaches when you bring in the overnight supply and stack it where you can reach it without getting out of bed if needed. And the fire itself, fed by this rhythm, keeps burning, keeps the cabin warm, keeps the family safe. The wood comes in, the fire consumes it. Heat radiates out into the small space, and winter stays outside where it belongs. Simple exchange, ancient transaction, repeated every evening through the long season of cold and darkness. The evening meal takes shape not through dials and timers, but through understanding the wood stove's shifting moods. By late afternoon, someone has built the fire back to steady heat. The breakfast coals were coaxed to flame hours ago, through the wham. Day the stove has been fed, not constantly, but in rhythm. Now, as darkness settles outside and the family gathers, dinner begins as fire management. Temperature control happens through flame and position. The hottest zone sits directly above the firebox, where cast iron glows if left too long. Toward the edges, heat moderates. A pot of stew can simmer at the stove's far corner, while water boils rapidly near the center. Moving cookware across the surface becomes second nature, adjusting heat not by turning knobs but by reading the fire beneath and shifting pots accordingly. Cast iron dominates, heavy skillets, Dutch ovens with fitted lids, kettles that live permanently on the stovetop, always holding hot water. These tools absorb heat, distribute it evenly, tolerate the temperature swings that come from tending fire rather than setting thermostats. One-pot meals make sense here. Stew with moose meat, root vegetables from the cellar and dried herbs, beans and rice cooked slowly through the afternoon, soup built from whatever remains, bone broth, garden vegetables preserved in summer, wild game. The simplicity isn't sacrifice, it's alignment with how wood heat works. Many families bake bread in the stove's oven. The process requires familiarity, knowing how your particular stove holds temperature, how to bank coals for steady heat rather than peaks and valleys when to rotate the pan. The smell fills the cabin, yeast and browning crust, warmth and scent inseparable. A child might be stationed to watch the fire during cooking, not constantly, but checking, adding a split log if flame drops, adjusting the damper to bring more air if heat fades, learning that dinner depends on maintaining the fire, that eating and warmth come from the same source. There's no separating the meal from survival. The stove feeding the family is the same stove keeping them alive through the night ahead. Cooking isn't just preparation of food, it's participation in the ongoing negotiation with cold. Every pot of stew, every loaf of bread comes wrapped in heat that radiates outward, warming hands and faces, contributing to the cabin's overall temperature. Timing becomes flexible. Dinner's ready when the stew has simmered long enough, when the bread test's done, when the fire has cooperated. Not at 6 o'clock sharp, but when the rhythm of fire and food align. Families adapt. Meals stretch across wider windows. The rigidity of scheduled eating gives way to readiness. Cleanup involves that ever-present kettle. Hot water poured for washing, gray water saved or tossed outside where it freezes before hitting ground. Dish soap used sparingly. Everything done near the stove's warmth because that's where comfort lives. Some families describe the stovetop as constantly active. A pot of beans started in the morning, bread rising near the warmth, wet mittens drying on a rack, the kettle always ready, hot water for tea, for washing faces, for filling hot water bottles later. The cooking surface becomes the center of domestic life, with food preparation just one of many simultaneous uses. Children grow up understanding fire and food as linked. They learn young which woods burn hot for boiling, which smolder slow for baking. They absorb the knowledge that you can't cook without heat, can't have heat without fire, can't maintain fire without attention. Dinner becomes a lesson in cause and effect, intending what sustains you. The evening meal also marks transition. The family gathers. Work outside is ended. Too dark, too cold, or both. Now comes the inward turn. Eating together at the table near the stove, lamplight pooling on plates, the day's cold still radiating from coats hung nearby, food hot and filling, the cabin warming from cooking. After eating, the stove continues. It doesn't rest because the meal is finished. The fire that cooked dinner will heat water for washing, will warm the cabin through evening, will eventually be banked for overnight. Cooking isn't an isolated task, but one phase in the continuous cycle of fire tending that structures the family's entire existence. The skills involved aren't exotic, but they're genuine. Reading heat by hovering a hand above cast iron. Knowing when to add wood and when to let coals settle. Understanding that bread needs steady temperature while stew tolerates fluctuation. These aren't skills learned from manuals. They come from repetition, from seasons of cooking on the same stove, from mistakes that resulted in burnt cornbread or undercooked beans. There's a particular satisfaction in a meal produced this way. Not romantic pride, but the quiet competence of having managed multiple variables. fire, timing, ingredients, heat zones, and produce something nourishing. The dinner wasn't effortless. It required attention, and that attention is the same attention keeping the family warm, keeping winter at bay. As evening deepens, the cabin enters a different quality of light. There are no switches to flood rooms with brightness. Instead, light comes in small pools, a propane lantern hissing softly on the table, a kerosene lamp with its warm, slightly flickering glow, LED headlamps powered by solar-charged batteries, their beams narrow and directed. Light becomes localized, intentional, finite. Many families describe embracing dimness rather than fighting it. The cabin doesn't need to be uniformly bright. Most of the space can rest in shadow. Light gathers where activity happens, over the table where children do homework, near a chair where someone reads, at the kitchen counter where dishes are washed. The rest falls into comfortable darkness. This isn't deprivation. It's alignment with the body's older rhythms. Brightness signals wakefulness. Dimness suggests rest. For thousands of generations, humans wound down as light faded. Here, that pattern reasserts itself naturally. Propane lamps produce steady light and surprising warmth. They become another heat source, small but noticeable in the evening cold. The mantles glow white, the light somewhat harsh compared to kerosene's softer gold. Families ration propane carefully. Tanks must be refilled or replaced, which means trips to town or bulk deliveries scheduled months in advance. The lamp burns for activities that require clarity: schoolwork, detailed handwork, cooking. Kerosene lamps offer gentler illumination. The flame dances slightly behind glass chimneys. Wicks need trimming. Reservoirs need refilling. The light doesn't reach as far as propane's brilliance, but it's enough for reading, for conversation, for seeing faces across the table. The smell of kerosene becomes part of evening. Not unpleasant, just present, woven into the sensory fabric of winter nights. Some families use LED lamps powered by small solar setups. Batteries charged during brief daylight if sun manages to reach the panels through snow and low winter angles. These lights are cold and efficient. They don't add warmth like flame-based lamps, but they're safer around children, don't consume fuel, and can last hours on a charge. Headlamps become common, hands-free light for moving through the cabin, for fetching firewood, for any task requiring mobility and vision simultaneously. The darkness itself becomes a presence, not threatening, but real. Shadows gather in corners. The space beyond lamplight holds depth. Children learn to navigate the cabin's geography in dimness, knowing where furniture sits, where the floor creaks, how many steps from table to sleeping loft. Evening activities cluster around light sources. Homework happens at the table under the propane lamp. Papers and books gathered in the bright circle. A parent might read aloud by kerosene light. Children arranged nearby, listening in the warm glow. Handwork, knitting, carving, mending, happens close to flame, eyes needing clarity for detailed tasks. Conversations deepen in lamplight. Without screens offering escape, without the option to retreat into separate rooms, with individual entertainment, the family remains together in the lit zones. Talk happens because there's time for it, because darkness outside and dimness inside create a kind of enclosure. The world shrinks to the cabin, and within the cabin, to the pools of light. The contrast with modern life is stark. In grid-connected homes, darkness is banished entirely. Rooms flood with light at the touch of a switch. Brightness continues until sleep. Here, evening means gradual dimming. As night progresses, lamps might be extinguished one by one. The cabin grows darker. The signal to rest becomes unmistakable. Children's sleep often comes easier in this environment. Their bodies aren't fighting against artificial brightness that suggests continued day. The dimness, the warmth of the stove, the quiet, all cue rest. Bedtime isn't a battle against stimulation, but a natural conclusion to the day's arc from light to darkness. Some families Describe a particular beauty in lamplight, the way it softens faces, how shadows dance on log walls, the golden quality that makes evening feel separate from day, a different country with its own rules. There's intimacy in gathered light, everyone drawn close, sharing warmth and illumination. The darkness beyond, holding the family together. The lamps themselves require tending. Wicks trimmed so they don't smoke, chimneys cleaned of soot, propane connections checked for leaks, mantles replaced when they disintegrate. Even light in this context isn't automatic. It's maintained, rationed, respected as a resource. Reading happens differently. Books held close to flame. Pages turned carefully so as not to block light for others sharing the lamp. The pace slower, perhaps, but attention sharper. Without distractions, the story holds focus completely. As the evening wears towards sleep, the family begins to release even lamplight. Someone extinguishes the propane lantern, conserving fuel. The kerosene lamp on the table gets turned down, flame reduced to a low glow. Maybe one LED lamp remains, just enough to navigate final tasks, banking the fire, checking that doors are secure, moving toward beds. The darkness waiting isn't absolute. Firelight flickers through the stove's vents, casting moving patterns. Eyes adjust. The darkness becomes navigable, familiar, almost companionable. This voluntary embrace of dimness isn't hardship. It's recognition that light, like heat, costs something. Fuel, effort, attention. And that darkness, rather than being an enemy, is part of the natural cycle that makes rest possible, that allows the body to recognize night and respond accordingly. In the last moments before sleep, the cabin rests mostly in shadow. The stove glows. Perhaps one small light remains turned low. Outside, winter darkness stretches unbroken. Inside, the family settles into quiet, into warmth, into the rest that genuine darkness makes deeper. Without electricity, evening entertainment contracts to what hands and voices can create. Conversations unfold across the cabin. Children play cards at the table. Someone knits by lamplight. A parent reads aloud from a worn paperback. The stove ticks and mutters as cast iron expands with heat. This isn't deprivation. It's a different quality of attention. In modern homes, entertainment flows from screens. Infinite options, algorithmic feeds, the constant option to disengage. Here, boredom has nowhere to hide. A child finishes homework and faces actual emptiness. The impulse to reach for a device finds only air. What fills that space reveals something about human adaptability. Initial restlessness gives way to invention. Children develop elaborate games with simple materials. They carve wood by the stove. They draw. They pester parents with questions that actually get answered because there's time for answering. Families report that conversations deepen when no one can escape into a phone. Talk meanders, doubles back, explores tangents. The rhythm slows to match the pace of thought rather than the pace of notifications. Board games stretch across evenings, Monopoly sessions lasting days, chess tournaments. Cribbage played until the score sheet fills. These games become family chronicles. Players remember specific moves, legendary victories, dramatic collapses. The game itself matters less than the structure it provides for being together. Reading aloud returns as communal entertainment. A parent reads chapters each night, adventure novels for younger children, classics for older ones, sometimes histories or survival narratives that mirror their own lives. Everyone gathers within range of the reader's voice. Younger children lean against older siblings. Someone mends clothing while listening. The stove provides both warmth and white noise. Handwork fills hours. Knitting projects grow steadily through winter. Socks, hats, sweaters that will be worn until they wear out and need mending again. Men carve wood, repair tools, splice rope, work leather. Children learn these skills not as quaint crafts, but as practical necessities. A child who can mend a tear or sharpen an axe contributes real value. Music for families who play instruments becomes evening ritual. Guitars, fiddles, harmonicas, singing. Not performance, but participation. Everyone joins regardless of skill. Songs get passed down, lyrics half remembered and improvised. The music isn't polished, it's functional, binding time together, creating rhythm where winter offers only stillness. The quality of attention shifts without digital interruption. Tasks get full focus because there's no notification pulling consciousness elsewhere. A child building with blocks constructs elaborate cities, narrating stories, playing until genuinely finished, rather than until the next stimulation arrives. This extended attention, increasingly rare in connected homes, remains ordinary here. Families describe that children initially struggle with unstructured time. The first weeks off-grid often involve complaints of boredom, requests for screens, difficulty settling into slower rhythms. Then something shifts. Imagination activates. A child who claimed nothing to do suddenly spends hours on self-directed projects. The boredom that seemed unbearable becomes a productive space where creativity germinates. Parents notice their own attention stabilizing. Without the habit of checking phones, mental space opens. Thoughts can extend and develop without fragmentation. The constant low-grade anxiety of staying updated fades. What felt like connection reveals itself as noise. The quiet, at first uncomfortable, becomes restorative. Darkness enforces winding down. As lamplight creates islands of visibility surrounded by shadow, the body receives ancient signals. Unlike electric light that mimics day indefinitely, flame and limited battery power create natural endpoints. When the lamp dims, it's time to sleep. No option to scroll another hour. Children complete homework in lamp glow, pencils scratching on paper, faces bent close to see clearly. Math problems, reading assignments, essays written longhand. The work happens slower but often with more care. No tabs open for distraction. The assignment and the child negotiating directly. This isn't romanticized simplicity. Families report frustration too. The wish to look something up immediately, to stream a movie on a hard day, to video call distant relatives. The absence of those options creates real loss. But it also creates presence. Evening conversation covers practical topics. Tomorrow's weather and whether outdoor chores are possible. The firewood supply and whether another cutting session is needed before spring. Plans for the next town trip. But talk also wanders into stories. How things used to be done. Family history. Speculation about neighbors. Processing the day's small events. In the warm core near the stove, with darkness pressing against windows and cold held at bay, the family creates its own gravity. Everyone orbits the heat source, moving in and out, but returning. A child finishes a project and migrates back to the warmth to show it. A parent steps into the cold bedroom for supplies, then hurries back to firelight. The evening becomes a gentle descent towards sleep. No dramatic transition, just gradual quieting. Voices lower, activities wind down. Someone banks the fire for night. Lamps extinguish one by one. As true night settles, or in deep winter as afternoon darkness deepens into evening, families begin preparing for the vulnerability of sleep. This isn't the simple routine of brushing teeth and changing clothes. It's a systematic process of arranging survival. Boot drying comes first. Wet boots in serious cold mean dangerous feet tomorrow. Families position boots near the stove, but not too close. Leather cracks from excessive heat. Rubber melts. Finding the right distance becomes intuitive. Boots stand in a semicircle around the stove's warmth, steam rising from damp felt liners. Gloves drape over a rack. Wool socks hang on a line strung above the stove. The smell of drying wool fills the cabin, lanolin and sweat and wood smoke. Not entirely pleasant, but deeply familiar. It's the smell of work completed, of another day navigated. Families stop noticing it the way they stop noticing the stove's heat on their faces. Outer winter gear needs similar attention. Snow pants hang to dry. Parkas get checked for tears or weak spots. Insulated coveralls steam gently. Everything must be dry by morning because putting on frozen clothing isn't merely uncomfortable, it's genuinely dangerous, robbing body heat at the moment you need it most. Children finish evening tasks. Homework gets put away. Toys migrate back to shelves or boxes. In tight quarters, disorder accumulates quickly, so evening tidying isn't optional. A cluttered cabin means tripping hazards in. Darkness, lost items when you need them urgently. Visual chaos that wears on nerves during months indoors. Water containers get topped off. Families ensure sufficient water sits near the stove for morning, for coffee, oatmeal, washing faces. If water comes from outside, no one wants to make that trip at dawn in the coldest hour, so evening water hauling becomes routine. Buckets filled. Kettles positioned on the stove's cooler edge so morning water starts warm. The fire requires strategic management. This is the evening's crucial task, banking the stove for overnight. Done properly, coals survive until morning. Done poorly, the family wakes to a cold cabin and the difficult work of restarting fire from scratch. Banking means loading the firebox with dense, slow-burning wood. Hardwoods like birch if available, thick splits that will smolder rather than flame. The dampers get adjusted to restrict airflow, enough oxygen to maintain combustion, but not enough for vigorous burning. The goal is slow, steady heat release over maximum hours. Families check the ash level. Too much ash smothers the fire. Too little provides inadequate insulation for coals. Experienced fire tenders know the right balance by sight and feel. They peer into the firebox, reading the coal bed like text, adjusting based on wood type, outside temperature, and how cold they're willing to let the cabin get before morning. Children learn this skill young. A 10-year-old often manages the evening banking under parental supervision, developing judgment about wood selection and damper settings. It's real responsibility. The family's comfort depends on getting it right. That weight teaches competence in ways that chores in heated homes rarely do. Parents mentally review tomorrow's needs. Is there enough wood inside for morning? Are paths shoveled to outhouse and woodshed, or will morning require digging out? Is the weather shifting? The forecast lives in the body here, in pressure changes felt in old injuries, in the quality of cold, in wind direction. Food gets set out for breakfast, oatmeal in a pot, ready for water. Coffee grounds measured. Frozen bread moved from the cold room to thaw overnight. Morning happens smoother when these preparations happen now, before cold and darkness and sleep fog make simple tasks difficult. Families gather close to the stove for these final tasks, orbiting the heat source as activity winds down. Conversation continues, but grows quieter. Someone might read a few more pages aloud. A child asks a last question. The cat relocates from lap to lap, seeking maximum warmth. Faces get washed in warm water heated on the stove. Teeth brushed. For families with running water, these tasks happen at a sink. For those without, it means basins and pitchers, routines borrowed from a century ago. There's no shame in this, it's simply logistics. The lamps get dimmed or extinguished in rooms not being used. Darkness reclaims the cabin's edges. The lit space contracts to the area around the stove and wherever beds are located. This dimming signals the body. Day is ending. Sleep approaches. Final bathroom trips happen now. For families with indoor composting toilets, this is straightforward. For those using outhouses, it means bundling into winter gear for a brief, urgent trip into serious cold, one of winter's least pleasant routines, especially on nights when temperatures plunge and wind scours exposed skin. Parents check on the children. Are they dressed warmly enough for sleep? Cabins don't maintain uniform temperature overnight. Even with the stove banked, the building cools. What feels comfortable at bedtime may feel cold by dawn. So children wear layers to bed, long underwear, wool socks, sometimes hats. Beds get prepared, extra blankets pulled up. Hot water bottles filled and wrapped in towels, placed at the foot of the bed to warm the space before bodies slide in. Some families heat stones by the fire, wrapping them carefully to provide hours of radiant warmth under covers. The family makes final circuits, checking that the stove door is secure, that nothing flammable sits too close to heat, that the lantern is extinguished or turned to its lowest setting. These checks are habitual, performed without conscious thought, muscle memory developed over winters. Everyone migrates toward sleeping spaces. Some families sleep in a loft above the main room, where heat naturally gathers. Others arrange mattresses near the stove during the coldest months, creating a shared sleeping area. Privacy yields to practicality. Warmth matters more than separation. The cabin settles into night. Outside, temperatures drop, wind moves through spruce trees. Snowfalls or stars blaze in clear frozen sky. Inside, the family burrows into layered blankets, the stove ticking and muttering as metal expands and contracts, coals glowing behind the iron door. This is the moment of vulnerability, surrendering to sleep in conditions that would kill an unprepared person. But preparation has happened. Wood is stacked, fire is banked, bodies are layered. The cabin holds. Sleep comes. Winter changes how families sleep, not gradually, not as preference or comfort. Winter removes the possibility of separate bedrooms, heated to individual comfort. The modern luxury of privacy and personal space, maintained regardless of temperature outside. Instead, families modify their sleeping arrangements according to the logic of heat. Many move to loft spaces for the winter months. Heat rises. And this is not metaphor, but physical law. Warm air, being less dense than cold, moves upward through the cabin. The sleeping loft, positioned above the main living area where the wood stove radiates warmth, becomes the warmest zone in the structure during overnight hours. Families who built their cabins with this in mind designed lofts specifically for winter sleeping. Low ceilings that an adult cannot stand fully upright in. Just enough room for mattresses and the minimum clearance for sleep. These compressed spaces hold heat more effectively than tall rooms, creating a warm cave where the day's accumulated warmth pools and lingers. Some families without lofts bring mattresses down from cold bedrooms entirely. They arrange them on the main floor near the stove, not directly beside it. The radiant heat that close would make sleep impossible, but within the sphere of warmth that extends perhaps 10 feet from the firebox. This creates what families call the winter nest. Mattresses side by side, parents and children sharing space that would feel intrusive in summer, but becomes necessary when temperatures outside drop to -30, -40. Heavy blankets piled on top, down comforters, wool blankets underneath for insulation from below. The construction of sleep becomes as deliberate as the construction of the cabin itself. Body heat matters in these arrangements. Each sleeping person generates warmth, roughly 100 watts, the equivalent of a bedside lamp burning through the night. In a shared sleeping space, this collective warmth combines with the heat rising from the banked stove below or nearby. The mathematics of survival written in gathered bodies and shared blankets. Privacy becomes a summer luxury. In winter, families return to sleeping arrangements that would have seemed normal to their great-grandparents, but feel unusual to people raised with central heating and separate rooms. Children sleep near parents. Siblings share mattresses. The family becomes a unit not just socially but thermally, a collective organism maintaining warmth through proximity. Some families use extreme cold sleeping bags as bedding. The mummy-style bags rated for mountaineering expeditions, designed to keep a person alive on an exposed glacier. These become winter blankets in cabins where interior temperatures might drop to 40 degrees Fahrenheit by morning. The family essentially camps inside their own home, using expedition equipment for domestic sleep. Night clothes change too. Flannel pajamas, long underwear beneath those, wool socks, sometimes wool hats pulled low. The idea of sleeping in light clothes or without covers, possible in heated homes, becomes absurd. Sleep requires insulation and preparation. You dress for sleep the way you dress for the day, understanding that the hours of stillness will allow cold to penetrate unless prevented. The bedding itself functions as survival equipment. Cotton sheets freeze at the edges where they touch cold walls. Families use flannel or remove top sheets entirely. The bottom sheet provides a barrier against the mattress, which can become cold from below if positioned on a floor above an unheated crawl space. Every layer serves a purpose. Blanket weight matters. Heavy wool blankets trap air in their fibers, creating insulation. Down comforters provide exceptional warmth for their weight, but require protection from the moisture of breathing. Families learn to layer, putting wool on top of down, to absorb the night's exhalation. A bed properly made contains 5 or 6 layers, each contributing to the thermal envelope that makes sleep possible. Children sleep more soundly than adults in these arrangements, their trust complete. They burrow under blankets and disappear, emerging in the morning warm and disheveled. Parents wake periodically through the night with the ancient vigilance that heated homes have made unnecessary, checking that blankets haven't kicked off, that small bodies remain properly covered, that no one has overheated and sweated, which would turn clothing damp and dangerous. The darkness of winter sleeping extends beyond night. In deep winter above the Arctic Circle, darkness continues through what should be daytime hours. Families sleep through periods that are called afternoon on the clock but show no sun. The body's rhythms struggle with this. Sleep becomes irregular, disconnected from light, requiring discipline to maintain anything like a normal schedule. Even in regions where winter brings short days rather than endless darkness, the family's sleep schedule shifts. When sunset arrives at 3 in the afternoon and dawn waits until 10 the next morning, the evening stretches long. Families go to bed earlier not because they are more tired, but because the darkness and cold make staying awake feel like fighting against something larger. The sleeping space holds the day's warmth longer than the rest of the cabin. Positioned near or above the stove, insulated by blankets and bodies, it remains comfortable even as distant corners grow cold. This creates a gradient. Families spend the evening gradually retreating from cooler zones toward the warm core where they will sleep. Movement toward bed becomes inevitable, following the logic of heat. Some families keep one lamp burning through the night, not for light particularly, but for the small amount of warmth a propane lamp generates. Also for the comfort of being able to see in darkness so complete that even open eyes register nothing. The lamp turns low, just a thread of flame, enough to cast shadows and confirm the presence of the familiar cabin rather than void. Getting into bed requires speed. The moment when clothing comes off and bodies are exposed before sliding under covers, that transition must happen quickly. Families develop efficient methods, undressing while standing on a rug near the bed, having night clothes warmed by the stove and put on immediately, minimizing the seconds of vulnerability between dressed and covered. Once inside the bedding, warmth builds slowly. The blankets start cold. Body heat fills the space gradually, transforming the cocoon from something to endure into something welcoming. This takes 15 or 20 minutes. Families lie still, letting physics work, waiting for the microenvironment of the bed to reach equilibrium. Sleep, when it comes, feels earned. Every evening, families face the same calculation: to feed the fire through the night, or to let it die. Neither answer is simple. Each carries consequences that will be felt in darkness, in cold, in the quality of sleep or lack of it. Feeding the fire continuously means someone must wake every 2 to 3 hours. The wood stove cannot hold a night's worth of fuel in a single loading. Even the largest firebox, packed full with slow-burning logs, will consume its contents through the long hours between bedtime and dawn. If the fire dies completely, the cabin temperature will drop precipitously. At -30 outside, the interior can reach near freezing by morning. Waking to feed the fire is not like checking a clock and rolling over. It requires getting out from under heavy blankets into cold air, walking across a dark room to the stove, opening the firebox, a moment when heat and light blast out, shocking in the darkness, adding wood carefully to avoid smothering the coals, adjusting the damper, waiting a few minutes to confirm the new logs catch, then returning to bed, now fully awake and attempting to return to sleep in the disrupted night. Some families establish rotations. Parents take turns. On alternating nights, one person carries the burden of broken sleep while the other rests undisturbed. In families with older children, teenagers sometimes take shifts, learning the responsibility of maintaining warmth for everyone sleeping. This arrangement works, but accumulates exhaustion. Even sleeping through some nights and waking through others, the pattern erodes rest. The body never fully settles into deep sleep cycles because some part of the mind remains alert to the schedule, anticipating the alarm or the internal clock that says 3 hours have passed. The alternative is banking the fire. Banking means loading the firebox completely with the densest, slowest burning wood available. Hardwoods, if the family has them. Birch cut thick, not split fine. The goal is fuel that will smolder through many hours rather than burn hot and fast. Once loaded, the damper gets closed nearly all the way, restricting airflow, slowing combustion to a crawl. A properly banked fire can hold for 6 to 8 hours, sometimes longer if conditions are right. The cabin will cool, but slowly. The stove continues radiating heat, though much less than during evening. By morning, the cabin temperature might drop 20 or 30 degrees from its evening comfort, but it will not plunge to dangerous cold. The compromise is accepting a cold morning. Families who bank the fire wake to cabins in the low 40s or high 30s Fahrenheit. Breath visible in the dim light. The floor cold enough that bare feet become painful within seconds. The ritual of morning becomes more demanding, rekindling the fire from banked coals, waiting for warmth to return, enduring the coldest part of the entire 24-hour cycle. Many families choose this path. Uninterrupted sleep becomes more valuable than continuous warmth. They accept the cold morning as the price of rest, building their routine around the challenge of starting the day in genuine cold, rather than fragmenting sleep to prevent it. The banking itself requires skill. Load the firebox wrong and the fire dies completely, leaving the family to wake to a cold stove and the much harder task of building fire from scratch rather than coaxing it back from coals. Load it too loosely and the wood burns faster than intended, defeating the purpose. Understanding the stove's temperament, the quality of the wood, the outside temperature, all of this feeds into the calculation. Different woods burn differently through the night. Spruce, common in Alaska, burns hot but relatively fast. Birch lasts longer and produces good coals. Cottonwood, often dismissed as poor firewood, actually works well for overnight burns. It produces steady heat without the intense temperatures that consume fuel quickly. Families learn these distinctions through winters of trial and error. The damper setting determines how much air reaches the fire. Too open, and the wood burns away. Too closed, and the fire smothers itself, or worse, creates conditions for dangerous creosote buildup and incomplete combustion. The correct setting exists in a narrow range, different for each stove and each type of wood. Families learn this range by feel and experience, adjusting slightly based on how cold the night will be and how long until someone will wake. Some families use a hybrid approach. They bank the fire but set one alarm for the deepest part of night, around 3 or 4 in the morning. One person wakes, adds a single load of wood, then returns to sleep. This splits the difference, allowing most of the night to pass undisturbed while preventing the cabin from becoming too cold and extending the morning warmth. Children usually sleep through whatever approach parents choose. Their bodies under heavy blankets, held in the warm loft or nest, remain comfortable even as the cabin cools. They wake to whatever conditions morning brings without having experienced the night's negotiation. For them, warmth simply exists or doesn't, maintained by adults through means they might not fully understand until they're older. The overnight fire shapes family dynamics in subtle ways. The parent who wakes to feed the fire performs an invisible act of care. No one thanks them because everyone is asleep. The warmth they maintain is noticed only in its absence. This creates a particular kind of contribution, essential, repeated, unwitnessed. The night feedings become a quiet practice, unspoken but understood. Some families use sleeping bags rated for extreme cold instead of regular bedding. These bags, designed for mountaineering, keep a person warm to -20 or below. With such bags, the overnight fire becomes less critical. The cabin can cool significantly, and sleep remains possible. The family essentially camps inside their home, each person in their own insulated cocoon, less dependent on the stove's continuous warmth. This approach trades one challenge for another. Sleeping bags work but feel confining. Getting up in the night for any reason, using the indoor facilities, checking on children, means extracting yourself from the bag and exposing yourself to cold air. The bags also need ventilation to prevent moisture buildup from breathing, which means cold air reaches your face through the night. The fire's state in mourning tells the story of how the night went. Strong coals glowing red beneath ash. The banking succeeded. Gray ash with barely visible heat. The fire nearly died and morning will be cold. Complete ash with no hint of warmth. The fire went out entirely and the day begins with the hardest work of building fire from scratch in a cold cabin with cold hands. Families who have lived through many winters develop intuition about the overnight fire. They can look at a loaded firebox in evening and predict with reasonable accuracy what they will find at dawn. They learn to read wood density, to judge how the outside temperature will draw heat from the cabin, to know their stove's patterns. This knowledge becomes automatic, embedded in muscle memory and estimation that happens without conscious thought. The negotiation with overnight fire never ends. Every evening, the same decision. Every morning, the consequences of that decision. Through the long winter, this rhythm continues, balancing sleep against warmth, calculating what can be endured and what cannot, making peace with cold or fighting against it through fragmented nights. The fire through darkness keeps its own time. The bed in an off-grid Alaskan cabin is not simply furniture, it is a piece of survival equipment, built with the same care families apply to choosing insulation or banking the evening fire. Sleep in this environment becomes something achieved rather than assumed, something engineered through layers, materials, and preparation, not simply lying down. The foundation begins with wool blankets, multiple layers. Wool chosen specifically because it insulates even when damp, when breath condenses through the night, when bodies sweat beneath too many covers, when moisture inevitably accumulates. Cotton loses its warmth when wet. Synthetic materials can trap moisture against skin. Wool continues working. Families who have lived through northern winters understand this distinction. They invest in heavy wool blankets the way others invest in vehicles. Over the wool comes down, thick down comforters that trap air and body heat. The weight itself becomes comforting in deep cold, something substantial between sleeper and the room's chill. Many families layer two comforters, one medium weight, one heavy. The combination creates adjustability through the night as fire dies and cabin temperature drops. Beneath the sleeper, flannel sheets, the fabric warm to touch even before body heat arrives, not the slick coolness of cotton that requires warming. Flannel that feels immediately soft, welcoming. A small comfort that matters when climbing into bed in a 40-degree room. But the engineering extends beyond bedding itself. Families sleep in clothing. Long underwear, thermal tops and bottoms that create a base layer of warmth. Thick socks, often hats. Wool caps pulled low because significant heat escapes through the head, and preserving that warmth matters through the coldest hours before dawn. Children present particular challenges. Young bodies generate less heat. They kick off blankets in sleep. Many families place children in fleece sleeping bags inside their regular bedding, a warm cocoon that moves with them, maintaining insulation even when blankets shift. Some families sew sleeping bag liners, creating custom sleep systems for each child, sized appropriately, secured so they cannot be kicked free. The bed becomes a microclimate, a warm cave within the cooling cabin, warmth generated by the body and trapped by layers. The temperature inside this nest might be 70 degrees while the room beyond drops to 40. The difference between comfort and genuine cold exists within inches, the boundary maintained by wool, down, and flannel. Families speak of building the bed each evening, not simply pulling back covers, checking that layers are properly arranged, that wool blankets lay smooth without gaps, that comforters overlap at edges, that children's sleeping bags are positioned correctly, the same attention given to banking the fire, both tasks preparing the family for the vulnerability of sleep. Some families heat stones by the fire and wrap them in towels, placing them at the foot of beds before sleep. The stones radiate warmth for hours, a small luxury that makes the initial entry into cold sheets less jarring. Others heat water bottles. Simple technologies, but effective. Taking the edge off that first cold moment. The morning reveals the night's work, condensation on windows from breathing, the particular cold that settles before dawn. Rising requires willpower, leaving the warm nest for the cabin's chill. Many families keep robes or heavy sweaters within reach of the bed, the first layer grabbed immediately upon waking, moving quickly toward the stove where someone has already begun rebuilding fire. This is sleep in winter. Not the thoughtless collapse into bed of heated homes, but careful preparation, layers assembled, warmth trapped and held. The bed becomes fortress and refuge, the place where the body, finally still, must maintain its heat through the longest, coldest hours, where survival becomes unconscious, where families trust their preparations to carry them through to morning. In Alaska's far northern regions, winter brings weeks without sunrise. The sky moves through shades of twilight. Blue darkness at midday, deep black at what might be called afternoon. The sun, if it appears at all, traces a brief arc along the southern horizon, a suggestion of day, then gone. Even in southern Alaskan communities, winter daylight lasts perhaps 4 hours, 5 at most. Families watch the sun rise after 10 in the morning, already tracking toward its 3 o'clock setting. The usable light, the hours when shadows exist and work can be done outdoors, compresses into a brief window. The rest is darkness. This disappearance of day affects families profoundly. The body expects light. It uses sunrise to regulate waking, sunset to trigger sleep. When these cues vanish, internal rhythms drift. Families describe difficulty waking. The body insists it is still night because darkness continues outside. Children sleep later, resist rising. Adults feel perpetual grogginess, the particular fatigue of a system waiting for morning that never fully arrives. Energy drops. The tasks of daily life, feeding fire, hauling water, caring for animals, feel heavier. Not because they have changed, but because the body lacks the natural surge that light provides. Movements become slower. Motivation requires more effort. Some families describe a constant low-grade tiredness, not exhaustion exactly, but the absence of vitality. Mood follows energy downward. The isolation of off-grid life, manageable in summer's long light, becomes oppressive in winter's darkness. Cabin walls feel closer. The sameness of days blurs together. Small irritations between family members grow larger. Depression, for those susceptible, deepens. The winter does not cause these feelings, but it strips away the buffers that normally contain them. Successful families understand this. They prepare for darkness as deliberately as they stack firewood. Knowing that psychological reserves must be built before winter arrives, they establish rigid routines, wake times that do not vary regardless of darkness outside. Alarm clocks set, lights turned on immediately. The day begun at 7 or 8 in the morning even though the world outside remains black, creating artificial structure when nature no longer provides it. Full-spectrum lighting helps, bulbs designed to mimic sunlight's wavelengths. Not the yellow warmth of regular bulbs, but bright white light that triggers the same responses in the brain. Families position these lights where morning routines happen. Kitchen, eating area, places where people gather. The light cannot replace sun, but it offers a reminder, a signal to the body that day has begun. Vitamin D supplementation becomes standard. The body produces this vitamin through sun exposure. When sun disappears, stores deplete. Families take capsules through winter months. Not a cure, but a compensation. Addressing the physical deficiency even when the psychological absence remains. Outdoor time, regardless of darkness, becomes non-negotiable. Families commit to going outside every day, even briefly, even when temperature or weather make it unpleasant. The air, the space, the break from cabin walls, all matter. They dress children in layers, step into the darkness, walk to the woodshed, or simply stand in the yard, breathing cold air, feeling weather, maintaining connection to the world beyond the cabin's warmth. Projects provide purpose. Families plan work for winter months, tasks that can be accomplished indoors, woodworking, sewing, maintaining equipment. Teaching children skills that require sustained attention. The projects break time into segments, give shape to days that otherwise blur together, provide small goals and completions that mark progress through the long darkness. Books become precious. Many families stockpile reading material before winter, ordering boxes of books, downloading digital libraries while internet access exists. Reading aloud becomes evening routine, stories that transport minds beyond cabin walls, that create variety in the monotony, that give families shared experience beyond their own repetitive days. Conversation, too, must be maintained. Families discuss this explicitly. The temptation towards silence when nothing new happens and everything has been said can lead to isolation, even while sharing space. Successful families commit to talking, asking questions, sharing thoughts, maintaining the habit of verbal connection, even when it requires effort. The darkness will end. Families know this, but knowing and feeling are different things. In December and January, when darkness seems permanent and spring impossibly distant, the knowledge helps less than the routines. The lights turned on, the time spent outside, the projects advancing incrementally, the structures that create rhythm when the sky provides none. This is how families survive the loss of day. Not by accepting darkness, but by building light, by creating their own markers where natural ones have vanished, by treating psychological preparation as serious as physical stockpiling. Understanding that surviving winter means maintaining the mind as carefully as maintaining the fire. The silence of an off-grid Alaskan winter night is not like quiet in other places. It does not fade into background. It does not become something you stop noticing. It has weight, texture, presence. Snow muffles sound across the landscape. Fresh powder absorbs noise rather than reflecting it. A person standing outside would find even their own footsteps dampened, softened, turned into whispers against the white ground. Darkness empties the land of activity. No traffic passes, no planes cross overhead, no neighbors run machinery or close doors or speak on distant porches. The forest itself goes still. Inside the cabin, there are no mechanical hums, no refrigerator cycling on and off, no furnace clicking to life, no computers whirring or electronics buzzing with phantom power. The absence of these sounds most people never consciously hear, creates a quiet so complete it becomes almost physical. Some families find this silence deeply restorative. They describe sleep coming easier, thoughts settling, nervous systems unwinding in ways that feel lost to modern life. Others struggle with it, the oppressive weight of absolute quiet, the way it magnifies small sounds, the psychological pressure of knowing you are truly alone in vast emptiness. But the silence is never actually complete. The fire crackles, wood pops and hisses as sap heats and escapes. Logs settle as they burn through, shifting position with soft thuds. These sounds become companionable, expected, almost conversational. The cabin itself breathes. Wood contracts in deep cold with creaks and groans. Walls settle. The structure speaks its own language of temperature and stress. Wind moves through spruce forests outside with a sound like distant ocean. Or it stops entirely, leaving stillness so profound it feels unnatural. Family members breathe in sleep, the rhythm of lungs filling and emptying, small movements against blankets, the presence of other humans made audible in darkness. Children sometimes murmur or shift. These small sounds carry clearly through the quiet, reaching parents' ears with perfect clarity. The quality of attention changes in this silence. Small sounds gain significance. A louder crack from the stove prompts someone to check the fire. An unfamiliar creak outside raises alertness. The howl of wind signals weather changing. Families learn to distinguish sounds. Normal cold speak from something concerning. The cabin's usual vocabulary from genuine problems. This deep quiet becomes part of sleep itself, not something to overcome, but something to rest within. Parents check their children through the night, not because of danger in the usual sense. No intruders to fear, no traffic outside windows. Because cold is genuinely dangerous, and sleeping children are vulnerable. A kicked-off blanket in a modern heated home means minor discomfort. In a cabin cooling toward freezing, it means real risk. Parents rise in darkness, moving quietly to where children sleep. They touch small shoulders through blankets, confirming warmth. They tuck covers back around restless sleepers. They adjust hats that have slipped off in sleep. Very young children sleep closest to the stove's heat, their beds positioned in the warmest zone of the cabin. Some families keep infants in parental beds through winter, sharing warmth directly, monitoring breathing and temperature through the night. Older children might sleep in lofts where heat rises, wrapped in extreme cold sleeping bags, bundled in long underwear and wool socks. But parents still climb ladders in the night to check them. The concern is double-edged. A child can be too cold, losing heat faster than their small body generates it. But they can also overheat, sweating under too many blankets, and that moisture becomes dangerous when they cool again. Parents learn to read signs by touch in darkness, the warmth of a forehead, whether blankets feel damp with perspiration, the quality of breathing, easy and deep or shallow with cold. This vigilance is instinctive, primal. Modern heated homes have made it unnecessary for most families, but the instinct remains dormant, ready to reawaken when children genuinely need protection through the night. Off-grid parents describe this heightened awareness not as burden, but as connection. The ancient mammalian duty of keeping young alive through darkness and cold. Children sleep deeply in this cold, their small bodies working harder to maintain warmth, their exhaustion from physical days complete. And parents keep watch. Sometimes the weather forecast arrives through radio static or satellite connection with words that change everything. Blizzard warning, wind chill advisory. Temperatures dropping to 40 below, maybe 50 with wind. Whiteout conditions expected, storm moving in tonight. When families hear this, preparation accelerates, not panic, practiced urgency. Firewood gets hauled inside in quantities beyond normal. Not tomorrow's supply, not this week's. Enough for 3 days, 4 stacked near the stove and along walls. Armload after armload carried from the woodshed while visibility still allows, building an indoor reserve against being unable to reach the outdoor pile safely. Food stores get checked, water containers topped off. Anything that might freeze gets moved closer to heat, outbuilding secured. Tools brought inside that might be needed. Flashlights tested. The propane level noted, everything vulnerable addressed while there's still time. Children sense the shift in adult attention. The quieter voices, the methodical checking. They absorb the seriousness without alarm, learning to distinguish routine winter from weather that requires respect. Then the storm arrives. Wind hits first, usually. Not steady blow, but gusts that shake the cabin's frame, that find every gap in construction and exploit it. The whole structure creaks, windows shudder in their frames, drafts appear that didn't exist an hour before. Cold seeps through walls that felt solid yesterday. The family gathers closer to the stove, not from fear, from thermal necessity. The warmth that usually fills the cabin now concentrates in a smaller radius. The far corners grow genuinely cold. Frost appears on window glass, thick and intricate. Outside, the world erases itself. Snow doesn't fall so much as fly horizontally, erasing the woodshed from view, the tree line, everything beyond 10 feet. White darkness. During daylight hours, barely brighter than night. Actual night comes early and absolute, The cabin becomes ship in frozen sea, riding out violence, waiting for weather to exhaust itself. At 3 in the morning, problems arrive without mercy. The cabin has grown cold, not cool. Cold. Someone wakes, parent usually, trained by years to monitor the night, and knows immediately something is wrong. The fire has burned too low. The banked coals that should sustain until morning have nearly died. Another hour and they'll be gone entirely, leaving the family to wake to dead ash and a cabin approaching outdoor temperatures. In darkness by flashlight, the rekindling begins. No time to dress properly, just bare feet on cold floor, sleep clothes, and the desperate work of saving fire before it disappears completely. Finding the smallest kindling, coaxing ember to flame. Breath held, watching. Building carefully, because rushing now smothers everything. 20 minutes to restore what should never have been lost. Heart rate elevated not from exertion, but from how close it came. How vulnerable they were in sleep. Other nights bring different emergencies, a child crying with fever, temperature climbing despite cool cloths, and children's medication from the carefully rationed supply. No urgent care clinic to drive to, no pediatrician to call, just parental judgment in darkness, deciding whether this requires the dangerous nighttime drive to town or whether it will break by morning. The weight of that decision crushing, or the water supply freezing despite every precaution. Containers near the stove turn to ice, the backup supply also solid. Morning will require water, and there is none. Only the slow thaw or the work of melting snow, scoopful by scoopful, yielding so little water from so much volume. Sometimes sounds wake the household, cracking that might be trees splitting in extreme cold, or might be something structural. Animal noises close to the cabin, unfamiliar creaking that requires investigation, though everything in the body resists leaving warmth for darkness and cold. The husband pulls on boots and parka over long underwear, takes the flashlight, steps into the Arctic entry, and then outside, breath freezing instantly. Checking the perimeter, finding nothing, or finding something that requires immediate attention despite the hour and temperature. There is no calling for help, no emergency services coming. The family is their own rescue, their own medical care, their own crisis management. Competence isn't optional, it's survival. The darkness brings its own vocabulary. Families learn to read winter nights by ear, developing fluency in the language of cold and wood and wind. Each sound carries information. Some offer comfort. Others demand attention. The cabin itself speaks constantly. Wood contracts as temperature drops, creating groans and cracks that move through walls and ceiling. Logs shift minutely in their notches. Boards pop. The entire structure adjusts to cold, tightening against it, and these adjustments are audible. Families stop startling at these noises after the first winter. They become expected, normal. The cabin settling into its night posture. Wind creates its own vocabulary. On still nights, the silence is nearly absolute, profound, almost physical. But when wind moves through the surrounding forest, it brings layers of sound. The whisper through spruce boughs, the creak of swaying trunks, occasional crashes when dead branches finally fall under snow weight. During storms, wind howls around cabin corners, finds gaps to whistle through, makes the whole structure feel like it's breathing against pressure. In extreme cold, temperatures dropping toward minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit or below, trees split. The sound is sharp, loud as a gunshot, carrying across frozen air. Sap freezes and expands. Wood fibers rupture. The crack echoes through darkness. First-time listeners often think someone is shooting. Experienced families barely pause conversation. Just another tree talking to the cold. The stove provides constant companionship. The pop and hiss of burning wood. The tick of expanding metal. The soft collapse as a log burns through and settles into coals. Some families swear they can hear the difference between spruce and birch burning, between dry wood and slightly damp. The stove's voice changes through the night as fire diminishes, its sounds growing quieter, less frequent, until only occasional pops mark the coal's slow fade. Outside, snow crunches under rare movements, a moose passing, a fox hunting, each footfall distinct in cold air. Families learn to distinguish these rhythms, the heavy, deliberate steps of moose, the lighter pattern of smaller animals. Sometimes nothing moves for hours. The stillness feels vast. Unusual sounds demand investigation. Metal falling in the woodshed, scratching near the food cache. Anything unfamiliar. Families dress in check, flashlight in hand, because ignoring the wrong sound carries consequences. Most times it's nothing. Wind knocked something over. Ice shifted, but checking becomes reflex. The night has texture families learn to interpret. Comfort found in expected sounds. Alertness tuned to ones that don't belong. Children raised off-grid carry complex memories of winter, neither purely hardship nor simple adventure, but textured with both difficulty and richness that suburban childhoods rarely hold. Many describe the cozy parts first, lamplight creating warm circles in darkness. Parents genuinely present without work commutes or electronic distraction. Family reading aloud for hours. Sibling bonds strengthened through shared space and limited playmates. The particular security of knowing the cabin is warm while wind howls outside. These memories hold weight, but they also describe the hard parts, honestly. Cabin fever that feels physically painful. Longing for friends when weeks pass without seeing anyone outside the family. Boredom that stretches endlessly despite books and games. The cold that makes getting out of bed a negotiation every morning. The bathroom trips that require full winter gear in darkness. Winter is long when you're young and trapped in small spaces. Children carry real responsibility. Their work isn't invented to build character. It's genuinely needed. Even young ones bring in kindling, check water levels, help with meal prep, manage their own cold weather clothing. They learn early that their effort directly affects family comfort. A child who forgets to bring in kindling means someone else makes a cold trip to the woodshed. A child who carefully stacks wood by size makes fire building easier for everyone. This creates different self-concept than praise for invented tasks. Children know when they're truly helping versus performing help. Off-grid children develop competence because incompetence has consequences. They learn fire safety because fire is real, present, dangerous. They learn to dress properly for cold because cold punishes mistakes. The environment teaches directly. Many describe pride in their skills. Knowing how to split kindling, tend fire, recognize unsafe ice. Feeling capable rather than merely accommodated. Some carry this confidence into adulthood. Others resent the childhood stolen by necessity. The experience doesn't produce uniform outcomes. Winter nights mean early bedtime when lamp fuel is precious and darkness comes at 3 in the afternoon. Children sleep longer in winter, bodies adjusting to reduced light. They bundle in heavy blankets, sometimes sharing beds for warmth. They wake to frost patterns on windows and cold air on their faces. They dress under covers before emerging. They learn the night sounds, which creaks are normal, what wind means for tomorrow's weather. How the fire sounds when it needs feeding. They become fluent in the cabin's vocabulary. Some find this knowledge comforting. Others feel trapped by how small their world becomes. The complexity remains. Wild childhood produces both genuine hardship and genuine richness. Children simultaneously more capable and more isolated than their distant counterparts. Dawn approaches in the kind of darkness only winter brings this far north. The fire has burned through the night. What was roaring warmth at midnight is now a bed of coals, glowing faintly beneath a layer of ash. The cabin temperature has dropped, not dangerously, not to the point where breath becomes visible, but enough that the air feels sharp against exposed skin. Someone must be first. In most families, this rotates. Sometimes it's whoever naturally wakes earliest. Other times it's decided the night before. The understanding is simple. One person faces the cold, so others don't have to. One person leaves the warmth of blankets and enters the chilled cabin to restart the day's heat. The moment of rising is a small shock. Feet touch cold floor. Air outside the blankets bites. The room is dim, either completely dark or showing the first gray hint of dawn through small windows. The stove sits quiet, its iron surface warm to touch, but no longer radiating the evening's heat. This is the coldest hour, not outside, where temperatures reached their lowest point hours ago. Inside, where the battle against cold must be won again. The first task is assessment. The person approaches the stove and opens the door carefully. Inside, coals remain, red underneath, gray on top. Some families bank their fires expertly and wake to significant embers. Others accept that morning will require coaxing flame from nearly nothing. Ash must be cleared from air intakes. The person uses a small poker or stick, gently scraping accumulated ash away from vents without disturbing the coal bed too aggressively. Air is what transforms sleeping coals into active flame. Kindling comes next. Thin splits of dry spruce or birch, saved specifically for this purpose. These pieces go onto the coals carefully, not smothering them, but positioned where heat will catch the wood. Too much too soon kills the fire. Too little leaves it struggling. The person watches, waits, sometimes blows gently on the coals to encourage them. A thin trail of smoke appears. Then a small flame licks up the side of a kindling piece. This moment matters. Once flame establishes itself, slightly larger wood can be added. The fire begins to grow. The person feeds it gradually, building heat in stages. Within 10 minutes, the fire is burning steadily. Within 20, the stove begins radiating warmth again. The cabin starts to wake. The cabin, which began the night warm and will end morning warm again, passes through its coldest hour in between. That hour arrives at dawn. The fire has burned through the night. The last logs have given their heat. What remains are coals, deep red if the banking was done well, ash gray if it was not. Either way, the temperature has dropped, not to outside cold, but enough that breath shows faint in lamplight. Enough that getting out from under blankets requires commitment. Someone must rise first. In most families, this rotates, though often one person becomes the morning fire tender by habit or preference. Whoever rises does so into cold air, bare feet on cold floor. The first moments are always uncomfortable, but there is satisfaction in this too, in being the one who brings the cabin back. The fire rebuilt, the stove begins its work again. Heat radiates outward slowly, and as it does, the family begins to stir. Children emerge from blankets in layers of wool and fleece. Clothes are warmed by the fire before anyone dresses. A shirt draped over the stove's edge, socks placed on the warming shelf. Water, heated in a kettle, is poured into bowls for washing faces and hands. These small acts of preparation, performed in the growing warmth, become the morning's rhythm. Breakfast cooks on the stove as the cabin continues warming. Oatmeal, pancakes, whatever can be prepared simply while the fire does its main work of heating the space. The smells mix with wood smoke. The family gathers near the stove, drawn by warmth and food both. Conversation is quiet at first, then grows as the cold releases its grip. This meal marks the transition. The night is over. Another cycle survived. The family sits together in the warmth they have maintained, eating food they have stored, beginning another day in a place where each morning is earned through preparation and tending. There is no drama in this, but there is quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from competence, from continuation, from knowing that they remain capable of thriving where winter makes demands that others cannot meet. Morning light, when it finally comes, spreads slowly across snow and frozen trees. The family moves into the day's routines, checking weather, preparing for outdoor work, feeding the animals if there are any, bringing in more wood for the cycle that will begin again when darkness returns. The cold remains. Winter continues, but for now, the cabin is warm, the family is rested. Another night has passed and another morning has arrived. This cycle will repeat through the long, dark months until spring finally breaks winter's hold. Each night will require the same preparation, the same tending, the same vulnerability and endurance, and each morning will bring the same quiet proof that they have maintained warmth and life in a landscape that would extinguish both without constant effort. There's a kind of peace in this, in the simplicity of the challenge, the clarity of what is required, the tangible connection between work and survival. The off-grid Alaskan winter night is brutal, but families who choose this life meet it with skill, with preparation, and with the understanding that genuine warmth, both the physical heat of a tended fire and the closeness of family drawn together by necessity, is not given freely, but earned through attention and care, night after night, until the season finally turns.